Chapter 976. The phone can't be connected. I don't know what's going on. In the hotel room, Song Ying frowned and looked at Song Howren. She had just called Luochio 3 times but couldn't get through. No, should I inform Grandpa? Song Ying hurriedly looked at Song Howren. Song Howren lowered his head and seemed to be thinking about something. After hearing Song Ying's question, he raised his head and said, "No need. Let's go look for it ourselves. Maybe he just can't sleep, so he's wandering outside. Now Dad is asleep. There's no need to wake him up. Then I'll ask Uncle Wu to send someone to look for him." Song Ying nodded and agreed with Song Howren. Song Howren shook his head. Uncle Wu probably won't dare to hide anything from Dad now. Let's not inform him. I'm better at finding people. Song Ying was stunned and suddenly remembered Song Howren's intuition that seemed to be favored by the god of luck. Indeed, Song Howren had always been convincing people with his terrifying intuition. Song Howren patted Song Ying's head and smiled. "Don't worry, I'll definitely find Luochio for you. Don't worry." "What do you mean by find him for me?" Song Howren just smiled. "Hurry up. If he goes too far, I won't look for him." "That's true. But how should I find him?" Song Ying sighed in distress. "I have no clue. Let's go to the guard room and ask first." Song Howren suddenly said, "Didn't that guy come back with a child's school bag?" "School bag?" Song Ying was stunned and reacted, "Paul's." Song Howren nodded. "There's no such school bag in the room. It should be Luochio who took it out. Maybe he planned to return it to someone or send it directly to the guard room. In fact, he was very reliable." Song Ying nodded. "If he was more serious, it would be perfect. It was probably in a restaurant called Little Alley Hall, but the restaurant was already closed." Qian was lying on a soft seat in the restaurant. She slowly woke up and looked at her surroundings. She was obviously very confused and even frightened by her surroundings. At the same time, she felt extremely weak and powerless. Suddenly, Qian seemed to recall something and reached out to touch her own body. Her clothes were gone, replaced by a large coat. It was a man's coat, but it was obviously not a Gimos's. But she only had her underwear left. Most women would feel uneasy if they encountered such a situation. "Are you awake?" Suddenly, a man's voice came from behind. Qian turned around in horror and saw a young man walking over with a bag in his hand. This made Qian extremely nervous and fearful. What do you want to do? What did you do to me?" Don't come over." "Well, would you like to put on your clothes first?" The young man, Luochio, put down the bag at this time. "Put on your clothes first. I'll wait outside." "You." Qian opened her mouth. "Oh, by the way, I've paid for the clothes." Luochio pointed to a closed fashion store downstairs and then leisurely walked to the outside of the restaurant. Qian was still uneasy, but she felt even worse because she was almost naked. She reached out to take the bag, then squatted under the seat, looking at the young man standing outside the restaurant with his back to her, and quickly put on her clothes. Well, the style was just average but not annoying. Qian looked at herself in surprise. She was wearing a checkered shirt and a pair of dark blue jeans. "You? How did you?" After putting on her clothes, Qian came to Luochio anxiously. "Why are you here? Weren't you in the guard room with your girlfriend?" Luochio turned around and stared at Qian for a while, then suddenly said, "So, the Qian who was with us just now was you? With you just now?" Qian frowned. "What are you talking about?" Luochio shook his head and suddenly said, "Nothing. When I found you, you were left in the bathroom, and your clothes. I was going to call the airport guards, but they seem to be very busy now. You don't know yet, probably when you were in a coma, there was an explosion here, and it seems that a woman died. I heard that her death was quite gruesome, and her face was cruelly skinned by the murderer." Qian was shocked when she heard this. Luochio continued, "But since you're awake, go and report it. By the way, why did you faint? Do you remember who knocked you out?" "I don't know who it was." Qian quickly shook her head. "I just wanted to hide from the 2 guards, but when I was in the washroom, someone suddenly covered my mouth and nose with something from behind. Then I don't know what happened after that." "Agamos, where is Agamos?" "Probably at the temporary workplace of XX Airlines." Luochio said casually, "I just heard the broadcast and asked Miss Qian to go there after hearing the broadcast. I think if you disappeared, your male friend would be very worried. So, he should go there after hearing the broadcast. Do you want to go there?" Why did the broadcast call me? Chowan looked at Luochio confusedly. She kept a distance from Luochio all the time. She had only met this young man once in the guard room and had no idea who he was. Unfortunately, when I found you, you had lost everything. Luochio shook his head. Otherwise, maybe you could contact Mr. Agamose through your cell phone, and maybe you would know something. Can you lend me your cell phone? Of course. Chowan took the cell phone and quickly dialed. Although the call went through, it kept ringing, but no one answered. Chowan's expression gradually became nervous and worried. No one is listening. Chowan looked at Luochio in fear. Luochio said indifferently, then report the case first. After all, you were attacked. Find my friend first. Chowan shook her head, glanced at Luochio, and suddenly said, it doesn't matter if you just lost some belongings. You know my identity once you report the case. I don't want the media to know. While speaking, Chowan anxiously grasped her arm and said with a trembling voice, in the past, there have been celebrities who were stripped naked and then photographed. You understand, right? If something happened to a celebrity and they couldn't make it public, it was really something that they couldn't do anything about, such a reason. I understand. Luochio smiled, and then glanced at Chowan's feet. She rushed out without shoes. Don't you wear shoes? Chowan gave a start, looked at her feet, and found that she really didn't wear shoes. She couldn't help feeling embarrassed. There's a pair of shoes in the bag, Luochio said indifferently. Flats. I think it's more suitable for you to act. Thank you. Chowan nodded. Ring, as long as there are other rings, that was what she thought, and this thought gradually corrupted some things. The black-clothed Joanne held Paul in her arms, lowered her head, and sat on an empty staircase. Is there a reason to kill yourself to get the life you want? The mysterious young man's words were still ringing in her ears. Others might not understand the meaning of this sentence. But Chowan in black obviously understood, and also knew the specific operation method. The root of all this was the emerald green ring that he was holding. The Eye of Horus was the name of this ring. On the day when Chowan in black's whole world became chaotic, the crazy woman who also wore the Eye of Horus ring appeared in front of her. The woman who had the same appearance, surname, and even the same soul as herself, but had different lives. Another version of herself. Yes, it was on that day. The day she separated from Paul, the day she was in a car accident, she suddenly appeared in a similar world that also had her, but was completely different. According to her own understanding, if the world she was in was World 1, then the world she was suddenly transferred to after the car accident was World 2. Then the crazy woman, the crazy her probably came from the unknown World 3. She came from World 3 and directly killed her in World 2, and then let her in World 1 witness the process. At the same time, the black-clothed Joanne also saw how the Joanne of World 3 killed the Joanne of World 2 and left calmly, using the Eye of Horus ring. She wanted to go back to her own World 1, but she could not freely use the Eye of Horus ring she had. In the limited number of times she jumped between different worlds, she could not return to her original World 1. She knew that she was here, but the energy of the Eye of Horus ring was exhausted. It was too scary. It was really too scary. Every time she thought of how Chowan in World 3 kept killing her in other worlds, Chowan in black would feel a chill from the bottom of her heart. That me? No, that woman was a complete lunatic. She had a completely rotten soul and could not be her at all. She jumped to many worlds, replaced her in many worlds, and then suddenly jumped away. What was her purpose? If he hadn't been in that car accident in World 1 and accidentally jumped to World 2 to witness this scene, he wouldn't have met this crazy Chowan in World 1. This unknown Chowan would have come knocking on his door, and then kill and replace her. Chowan in black did not dare to think too much. She could only resist instinctively. Not only did she have to let herself go back to World 1, but she also had to make this crazy Chowan unable to jump successfully again. The ring, she had to take all the Eye of Horus from the crazy Chowan. Or kill. Kill. No one can separate us, Paul. Chowan in black hugged Paul tightly at this time. The child had been tired for a day and had fallen asleep. Mom will be back soon. Chowan in black put Paul down, took off her coat, and covered Paul with it. Wearing only a white sweater, she took out a scarf, covered her chin and mouth, and quickly left. The broadcast. She had heard the broadcast of the airport looking for Xiao and... Aren't we going to the place mentioned by the broadcast? Agmos looked at the place where he was now with some surprise. This was obviously not the way to the place mentioned by the broadcast. I don't want to go there. Xiao shook her head. There must be a lot of people there. Let's call later and ask what's going on. If it can be solved verbally, there's no need to go there in person. Agmos nodded and suggested, let's go to the arrival hall. The checked luggage should have arrived. Let's see if we can take it. When we can leave later, it'll be more convenient. We don't have to rush to get the luggage. Okay. Xiao nodded happily and sighed. I really hope I can go home immediately and lie in bed. I don't have to think about anything. A woman in a white sweater with a scarf wrapped around the lower half of her face passed by Xiao and an Agmos. Agmos suddenly stopped and turned to look at the woman in the white sweater who was passing by. What's wrong? Xiao looked at Agmos in confusion, then looked at the back of the woman in the white sweater and frowned subconsciously. No, I feel like I've seen her somewhere before. Agmos shook his head. Maybe it's an illusion. It's okay, let's go. Xiao nodded and looked at the woman in the white sweater again, but she had already disappeared around the corner. But just as the two of them turned to continue on their way, something suddenly knocked into them from behind. Agmos and Xiao were knocked to the ground at the same time. Agmos looked up in a panic, only to see the woman in the white sweater, who should have walked past him, straddling Joan's body and strangling Joan's neck. What are you doing? Agmos was shocked and angry at the same time. He pounced on the woman in the white sweater and pushed her to the ground. Joanne. Agmos hurriedly helped Joanne up. Xiao was coughing with difficulty. At the same time, the woman in the white sweater on the ground stood up quickly. Agmos scolded the woman angrily. Are you crazy? We know. Xiao. Why? When she stood up from the ground, the scarf around her neck had been loosened, revealing her real face. At this moment, she and Agmos' eyes met directly. There are two Xiao in us? Agmos looked at Xiao and who he was protecting behind him. But at this moment, he felt a terrible pain spreading from his abdomen, spreading rapidly. Agmos looked at his abdomen in disbelief. Xiao behind him. Xiao, who told him not long ago that she wanted to get married, now had a cold look in her eyes and a small fork in her hand, stabbing it into his abdomen. It's not easy to come across such a good world, but why is it still so difficult? Xiao looked at Agmos expressionlessly. In that case, just destroy it, my dear. Chapter 977. Joanne in the white sweater, Joanne in the hoodie, and Agmos were not the only ones. Although the passageway was deserted, there were still pedestrians. Those who had witnessed the incident looked at Agmos, who was lying on the ground, in shock. Obviously, the newcomers did not know who Agmos was. They could not even see what the two women and one man looked like. But when one of them suddenly attacked and the other fell to the ground, it made people want to know what had happened. Seeing that there were pedestrians rushing over, the two Joans had different expressions on their faces. The Joan who attacked Agmos frowned and seemed rather irritated, while the Joan who wore a white sweater gritted his teeth, turned around, and ran back to where he came from. Joanne in the hoodie snorted, but soon her expression changed slightly, because she found that the Eye of Horus ring on her finger had disappeared. When did this happen? Was it when she was pinned to the ground and strangled? Was the target actually the ring on her finger? Joanne in the hoodie's eyes instantly turned cold. She took a step forward and caught up with the fleeing Joanne in the white sweater. Hey, don't go. The two pedestrians rushed over, but when they saw Agmos lying on the ground, they found that his abdomen was bleeding. They could not care less about catching up with the murderous woman and quickly called for help. Joanne, Agmos fell to the ground in pain and embarrassment. In his hazy vision, the two Jonas in front of him were running away, one in front of the other. It was as if they were chasing something. He had never seen Joan like this. When she said that she wanted to destroy everything without any emotion, but called him dear, it was as if he had lost everything, and his body was just an empty shell. It was just a moving, rotting corpse. In a trance, Agamos slowly closed his eyes. He could no longer hear the shouts of the people around him, and his vision slowly narrowed. In the end, he only saw the back of Qiao and who was walking away until she disappeared. She seemed to be chasing after something. The body is missing? The head of the criminal police brigade, who had just arrived, was very surprised. He was listening to a ridiculous report. There was actually a follow-up to the disappearance of the victim's body in the bathroom. When the forensic doctor came back after searching for clues, he found that the bloodstains that should have been left next to the corpse had disappeared. The bloodstains were not erased, because the forensic doctor had already used an ultraviolet light to examine the bloodstains. The bloodstains had indeed disappeared. Han Bingjiang hadn't woken up yet, but the victim's body and blood had disappeared without a trace. If even the body couldn't be found, then how could Han Bingjiang be convicted? Due to the disappearance of the corpse, the case instantly fell into a deadlock, and there was no progress. Who is that? Is it Xiaoan? Hasn't she appeared yet? The head of the criminal police brigade asked helplessly. Han Bingjiang had mentioned Xiao and several times during the interrogation, so the police decided to broadcast the search for Qiao and over again. It might not be useful, but at least it would alarm people. If the case really had something to do with this female star, there should be some clues. Qiaoan didn't appear, but we just received a report of a malicious injury in Area C. A foreign young man was stabbed in the stomach with a sharp weapon, and the weapon was a fork used for Western food. A fork? The captain was shocked. According to the report, the weapon used by the corpse in the bathroom was likely to be a Western food fork. At that time, Han Bingjiang was arrested because the fork was broken when he was leaving with his blood-stained clothes. Fork, body blood, the captain suddenly frowned. Go and see if the blood on the clothes used by Han Bingjiang to wrap the weapon is still there. The team members were stunned, but under the fierce eyes of the captain, they quickly did as he said. The team member quickly walked out. Not long after, the team member hurriedly came back with a seal bag. With a panicked expression, he said, "Captain, the bloodstains on the clothes are gone. What happened?" At this moment, the captain couldn't help but open his mouth in surprise. This was because he had seen this piece of clothing before he arrived, and it was indeed stained with blood. He could not believe his own eyes because the eyes were always wrong. But what if everyone's eyes were wrong? It's so weird, he muttered to himself, and suddenly said, Who attacked the foreign young man just now? Hurry up and catch this person. I have a feeling that the answer may be on this person. Move. Yes. Song Haoran walked casually in the airport with Song Ying. Song Haoran always had a smile on his face, so Song Ying didn't feel nervous at all. This made Song Ying feel that Song Haoran was somewhat similar to Luoqiu. It seemed that he was always anxious. Although he knew he had this problem, he couldn't change it no matter what. Sometimes it really made people envious, but sometimes it also made people anxious. By the way, what's the name of that child? Song Haoran suddenly stopped and asked Song Ying. You mean Paul? Song Ying answered subconsciously. Song Haoran nodded, and then turned around instantly, walking to the stairs leading to the smoking room. Song Ying helplessly followed, but found that Song Haoran came to a place selling cigarettes next to the smoking room. Song Haoran was now twisting the lock of a door behind the cigarette counter. But in a flash, Song Haoran directly broke the lock and opened the door. Is it this? Song Haoran pointed to the small room used to store sundries and cigarettes. Why is it here? Song Ying was stunned. Because in this small room, she saw the child named Paul. Paul was wrapped in a long black trench coat at this time. This should be the one worn by Joan, who took Paul away in front of them. At the same time, there was another woman in uniform in this small room. She was probably the employee who sold cigarettes here. After being knocked out, she was also placed in this place. It seems that this matter is not so simple. Song Haoran narrowed his eyes and stared at Paul for a while. The school bag is also here. So Luoqiu has seen Paul? Song Ying was stunned, frowning. He has contacted Joan in black. Maybe. Song Haoran nodded, then suddenly squatted down and opened Paul's school bag. Hey, don't rummage through other people's things. It's immoral. Song Ying frowned. Song Haoran tempted. There may be clues. Don't you want to know why there are two Joans? Songing him. But Song Howard had already started to rummage through the things in the school bag. It was just some very simple things: a sketchbook, a crayon bag, a small bag of soft candy, and some miscellaneous items. Nothing worth studying. Song Ying had seen this sketchbook before. Paul took it out and drew it when he was in the guardhouse. Luaccio picked it up and looked through it once, but Song Ying didn't pay much attention to it at that time. At this time, Song Howard also started to rummage through it casually, so he began to put the things back into Paul's school bag. This child, what's the matter? Song Howard was surprised at this time. What's the matter? Song Ying asked curiously. Song Howard turned one page of the sketchbook and put it in front of Song Ying. The painting was very simple. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was crude. However, when one carefully looked at the painting, they could not help but feel a chill run down their spine. In a black room with lines, a woman was holding a knife in her hand, and another woman was lying on the ground. On the ground, there was a lot of color with red crayons. The color of blood. This child, how can he draw this kind of drawing? Song Ying opened her mouth slightly in surprise. It's easy for children to write down what they see, Song Howard said indifferently. We always feel that children are easy to forget things. But it turns out that children can remember more things than adults, even things that they remember for a lifetime. Then is this how he killed someone? Song Ying couldn't believe it. Things seemed to be getting very interesting. Song Howard smiled at this time, looking at the sleeping Paul, seemingly thinking of something. Suddenly, Song Howard picked up Paul and said to Song Ying, "Come, let's hide first. Maybe there will be a good show later. Since we hid him here, he should be back soon." Ah, wait. Seeing that Song Howard had begun to hide with Paul in his arms, Song Ying could only quickly carry her school bag, then closed the door of the storage room, and then sighed and followed. How should I put it? Being by Song Howard's side is never boring. But he liked to seek death, which was really tiring. Speaking of which, how did he find out that Paul was hidden inside? The two quickly hid. In fact, they were in the rest area outside the stairs, pretending to be sleeping passengers. Of course, they held Paul and covered him with clothes at the same time. Is this useful? Song Ying frowned and asked. This guy seemed to have forgotten the purpose of coming out. Didn't he say he was looking for Luaccio? Aren't they here? Song Howard suddenly made a gesture of silence and turned his head slightly, looking back. Joan too. The two Joan Annis, one in front and one behind, were chasing each other at this time. The one in front was wearing a white sweater, and the one behind was wearing a sweater. They were chasing each other very eagerly. Joan Annis, wearing a white sweater, went directly to the stairs leading to the smoking room at this time. It seems that a good show is about to start. Song Howard's mouth smacked. Oh, what time is it now? How can you still have the mood to eat? What are you eating? Jelly candy, just found in the school bag. Do you want to eat it? It tastes good. Song Howard opened his palm at this time. You even snatched the snacks of child. That's unbelievable. Song Ying rolled her eyes, stood up, and walked to the stairs. She wanted to see what was going on with these two Joan Annis. Song Howard shrugged and carried Paul, then glanced at the jelly candy in his hand. When did this brand come out with this flavor? Why didn't I know before? Song Howard glanced at the production date curiously. July 11th, 2025. 2025. Thank you, Joan Annis suddenly said. So Luaccio stopped and looked at her with a curious expression. Joan Annis quickly said, "But you saved me, and I didn't thank you properly. It was a bit rude of me." What kind of life do actors have? Luaccio suddenly asked. Joan Annis was surprised by this question, and after a while, she smiled bitterly. This is not a very good job. Some people love it, some people already hate it, but still insist on it. Actually, they're just holding on with difficulty. To be honest, who will remember you decades later? That's true. Luaccio nodded and continued. Then let's go. There is not much time left. Luaccio suddenly pointed in a direction, which was not the location mentioned in the broadcast. Joan Annis frowned and asked subconsciously, "Not much time left? What do you mean? The time left for you?" Luaccio thought for a moment, then said, "Or the time left for you people is not much, at least that's what I understand for now." I don't quite understand what you were talking about. Joan Annis looked at Luaccio. She had always felt that this young man was very strange, and at this moment, she slightly lowered her guard. "Do you believe that everyone is unique?" Luaccio suddenly asked. Joan Annis just stared at him blankly. "Everyone is unique, at least in the same space-time," Luaccio said slowly. "That's why you won't see another you. And because of that, the space-time will become stable. This is a very complicated theory, but you can also see it as a kind of stability. Each of us is a gear of this world. Which gears stop working, which gears need to be replaced, and which ones need to be repaired. These are all things decided by the world itself. Only when order is not in chaos, the whole world will turn normally, just like a clock. However, if there was a non-existent gear in this tight clock, it would break this stability. What do you think the clock will become?" I don't quite understand what you were talking about. Haven't you noticed it yet yourself?" Luaccio said softly. "Your hand." "Hand?" Joan Annis subconsciously raised her arm. "My hand." At this moment, what frightened her the most was that her palm was actually fading away, as if it had gone through a process of transparency. She could already see the ground through her palm. "It will be erased," Luaccio said seriously. "You can see it as a self-protection mechanism. It will erase these parts that don't belong here, and try not to leave any trace, so as to ensure the independence of each part, so that order will be restored and time will continue to move forward. Do you understand?" I will disappear." "What do you mean?" Looking at her faded palm, she suddenly stretched out her hand to grab Luaccio in horror. However, she couldn't grab Luaccio's arm. Her palm directly passed through Luaccio's arm. Chapter 978. If all the losses can be recovered. If all the regrets can be made up. If all the regrets can be saved, then would the result be different? And what is the future? I always felt that the most humbling part of life is not how bleak the present is, but that you can't see the future. I originally thought that life was beautiful, and the future was beautiful. Everyone should think so. Fortunately, after graduation, I found a good and high-paying job in the eyes of others and classmates. Yes, I always felt that I was lucky, but why? Why is everything suddenly different? Yes, I shouldn't have gone back to the company that night. It was raining. It should have been raining. I don't remember that night. Why did I leave the key to the house at the company? Why did I go back? When I went back, I met the boss who was coming back from a social engagement. He was really drunk. I didn't want to do anything, but he pounced on me and tore my clothes. The thunder outside was very loud, and the weight of the boss on me was also very heavy. I was blank. I always thought that this kind of thing would probably only happen in the story of a TV series, in the plot of a novel, and in the news in the newspaper, and never to me. I mustered up the courage to sue this beast of a man, but he said that I seduced him. Yes, I lost the lawsuit because I couldn't afford a good lawyer. Suddenly, the labels of bitch, vixen, shameless, and the like became obvious on me. Then, because of the lawsuit, I became the false accuser and needed to be compensated. Interestingly, the boss said that he understood that I was a recent graduate who wanted to take a shortcut and get to the top in one step. For a while, I got lost on the road of life, so he planned to forgive me and didn't want my compensation. I lost my composure and was ridiculed by everyone. I was delirious. I should be grateful to him, right? So I gave him a very, very good gift. I cut off the tool he used to ruin my life. Well, when I cut off that thing, I didn't feel any sense of revenge. I simply felt that if I cut it off, then what he took from me should be taken back by me. That's boring. So I ended my own life. I closed my eyes and jumped from the top of the building. I thought it was over until I suddenly woke up. Until I met her. Until I met myself. She was also surprised to see me. She said it was like watching a sci-fi movie. In fact, wasn't I the same? Actually, she was luckier than me because she grew up in a very good family and was truly a rich young lady. She had almost everything that I could only dream of in this strange yet similar world. The interesting thing was that she had many things that I envied, but she told me that what she wanted was not what she already had. She wanted to be free and not be a puppet of her family. What kind of joke is this? What is the future? Obviously, I couldn't have her future, but why could she and I couldn't? And I need to suffer that pain. Since we are all the same, All the same, all the same, all the same. Then, why don't you disappear? Let me be you in this world. Now, I am Joanne, the Joanne of this world. The Eye of Horus ring. Later, I finally discovered its secret, the secret of coming to this strange yet similar world. It can jump through different time and space and bring me to my side. I feel like I have become the human who ate the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. I always feel that at the end of the unknown time and space, there may be unprecedented luck, a truly perfect life waiting for me. What is the future? Joanne walked down the stairs step by step. The fork in her hand was placed on the handrail, making a friction sound. She slowly walked down the stairs while looking at her other self in front of her, Joanne in a white sweater. As for which time and space this Joanne came from, she obviously didn't care much. In front of her, Joanne in a white sweater was frantically opening the door of the storage room behind the cigarette counter. Perhaps because she was too flustered, she didn't notice that the door was actually unlocked. The storage room was not big enough for eyes to see everything. But Joanne in a white sweater obviously didn't find Paul, who was supposed to be here. Only the clerk who was knocked out by her was left here. What is the future? The voice behind her was Joanne's voice. Chowan, who was wearing a white sweater, turned around in a panic. Paul was gone, which made her feel very confused. And there was another ferocious version of herself in front of her. She didn't even want to admit that this Joanne was her other self in a different time and space. She was like a beast with endless desires, a demon who released all the evil thoughts in her heart. You're that person, right? Chowan suddenly asked. This made Joanne in a white sweater open her mouth slightly. Chowan's fingers touched the sharp teeth of the fork as she smiled and said, "The guy who has been following me, the one who has been chasing me all this time. Actually, I can feel your presence several times. Do you know why I haven't done anything to you?" Joan, who was wearing a white sweater, leaned against the wall and looked around, trying to find a way to get out of danger. Although she had snatched the Eye of Horus from the other party, Paul had disappeared, so it was meaningless. You haven't done anything to me because you are afraid that I will retaliate, right? Joanne in a white sweater sneered and said calmly, "Since you know that I have met you several times, you should also know that I can use the ring." Joanne shook her head. Maybe this is also a factor to consider, but it is not the most important factor. The most important thing is that you and I are actually the same type. Joanne in a white sweater sneered. Don't think of me as you. You are a complete lunatic. In so many worlds, I have never actively hurt any of my other selves. But you, how many have you killed? How many? Joanne in a white sweater suddenly pursed her lips as if she was thinking hard. She suddenly smiled. 3, 5, 8, or 10, maybe more. I don't remember. By the way, I just killed 2 of them. Do you want to know? Joanne in a cold sweat. She didn't understand how such a man-killer demon could be created in a different time and space. 2. Joanne in a white sweater tried to distract her. How can there be 2 of us in this world? Us. Joanne's voice suddenly became cold. I am me. You are you. Even if we have the same name, we are independent entities. In my opinion, whether it is you or them, at most, we have the same appearance, but in another time and space, we are enjoying what belongs to me. So it is you, not us. Joanne in a white sweater took a deep breath. I heard that a skinned female corpse was found in a men's bathroom. You must be the one who did it, right? Yes. Joanne in a white sweater suddenly bit her fingernail. It was her own bad luck. I don't know how she activated the ring's function. But even after coming here, she still didn't notice. She even told me that this world was too magical, and she kept describing her life in the other world to me. She even brought Paul here with her. What a happy person. I've been to so many worlds, but I still haven't been to a place where I could give birth to Paul. No, I haven't experienced the happiness of being a mother either. I really can't help but want to destroy it. Don't find excuses for your cruelty, Joanne in a white sweater said coldly. No matter what, it's one thing to kill her, but it can't be helped, right? Joanne in a cold voice said, It seems that only one Joanne is allowed to appear in each world, so since I'm here, she can't have survived. She can only blame herself for disappearing too slowly and in a crowded place like the airport. If someone found her, it would be troublesome for me to stay. Joanne in a white sweater smiled. In fact, skinning is really a technical job. If you're not careful, you may not do it well. Joanne in a white sweater was horrified. Even though she had met Joanne in a limited number of jumps, she seemed to be crueler than the previous one. Depravity or corruption. In fact, I quite like this world because the development of this time and space is too similar to the development of my previous time and space. Since I'm here, it means that I've been reborn. Who doesn't like it? It's like going back to the time before regret. And I'm quite lucky. I happened to meet my enemy in the previous time and space. Han Bingjiang. I didn't expect to meet this guy again, and he's even an entertainment reporter in this time and space. But a leopard can't change its spots. They're all scumbags. No matter what others do in other time and space, they may not do it in this time and space. You're simply a devil. Joanne in a white sweater gritted her teeth, and then suddenly looked behind Joanne in astonishment. Why is there another one? Others might not understand this sentence, but Joanne in a white sweater obviously understood. There was another meaning. Joanne in a white sweater had met 3 different versions of herself here, including the one in white in front of her. One was the one who jumped with Paul. No, from the looks of it, she should have accidentally triggered the ability of the ring, so she was so unguarded. So, it should be said that she and Paul got lost in time and space and came here. The second one was the original star in this time and space, Joanne in a white sweater. The target that Joanne in a white sweater wanted to replace this time. But if there was another one, it was not impossible. Joanne in a white sweater subconsciously looked back, but there was no one on the stairs behind her. In an instant, Joanne in a white sweater felt like the world was spinning around her. Xiao in white was on top of her. She pressed her face against the cold floor with all her might. You can stay here forever. What kind of life you want has nothing to do with me. Joanne in a white sweater said coldly. I only want my Paul. I only want to take him away. You have nothing to do with me. Ha 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 ha. That's why I said, what's the difference between us? Look at you now. Joanne in a white sweater laughed. Do we look like each other? Do we look like each other? Now you can use we. I'm different from you. Joanne in a white sweater said angrily. Joanne in a white sweater sneered. Your child is dead, right? I mean, your child in the original world. Is he also called Paul? Is he dead? Or missing? Did he disappear from your hand? Nonsense. I found Paul. You're talking nonsense. 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 Ah, she felt a sudden stinging pain. Joanne in a white sweater, who was pressed down, mercilessly stabbed the fork into Joanne's waist. The head of the fork sank into Joanne's body. At the same time, Joanne in a white sweater turned over and pressed Joanne to the ground. She sat on Joanne's body, grabbing Joanne's neck with her left hand, while her right hand clenched into a fist, punching Joanne's face mercilessly. She hit Joanne with all her strength. After a while, Joanne in a white sweater stopped, panting, looking at Joanne in a white sweater whose face was covered with blood in her right hand. Her right hand was fading. The white-clothed Xiao's body was also showing the same signs. Joanne in a white sweater spat on Joanne's face. Tisk, it's already started. The world's correction. It seems that I have to kill you now. While Joanne in a white sweater was dying, Joanne in a white sweater pulled out the fork from Joanne's waist. Joanne in a white sweater screamed in pain. Sweatshirt Xiao and held the fork with both hands and raised it up, aiming it at Xiao's throat. Mom! A frightened child screamed from above. Xiaoan raised her head abruptly and saw an unfamiliar man and woman on the walkway at the top of the stairs. She had no idea when they had appeared. The woman's eyes widened as she covered her mouth. She was so shocked that she couldn't speak, while the man was holding a golden-haired child. Mom! Mom! The child screamed in horror, but the man suddenly covered his mouth with his hand. The man also looked down at this time and said with a cheeky smile, Sorry to interrupt you. Although I also have a lot of questions to ask you. I think you don't have time to answer my questions, so I think I'd better digest it myself. Well, do you want jelly beans? The man shook the soft candy bag in his hand and said embarrassedly, It seems to be a product from 2025. Joanne in a white sweater dodged Joanne's ring and put it back on her finger, disappearing in a flash. The man holding Paul, Song Howard, was stunned. Go to hell. The next second, a murderous voice came from behind. Chapter 979. When Xiaoan attacked Song Howard from behind, what Song Howard felt was not fear, but excitement. What was there to be excited about? There were too many mysteries in this world, and he had proven the existence of these mysteries over and over again. These supernatural powers were beyond the comprehension of common sense, but they definitely existed. The badge of the sun god, Mr. Blind, the three Song brothers, zombies, and vampires. He had opened up a corner of a huge world. In a split second, Song Howard's adrenaline suddenly surged. His reflexes, his strength, and his senses all increased crazily at this moment. His arms, which were hidden in his sleeves, seemed to be gushing with endless strength. Under his skin, a golden light flashed. When Xiaoan's fork was about to pierce the back of Song Howard's neck, he dodged. Not only did he dodge, but Song Howard's elbow also struck behind him at this moment. His elbow mercilessly hit Xiaoan's chest. Then, Song Howard suddenly turned around and kicked Xiaoan's side with his leg like a long whip. The strength of this spinning kick was so terrifying that Xiaoan flew sideways and fell to the ground a few meters away. Phew! Song Howard whistled and threw Paul, who was in his arms, directly to Song Ying. Song Ying hurriedly caught him and instinctively wanted to scold Song Howard's behavior. But Song Howard's face showed a kind of smile that made Song Ying's heart palpitate. She had never seen Song Howard with such a smile. It was like a lion galloping on the African prairie and seeing its prey. Song Ying's words were stuck in her mouth, which made her feel very uncomfortable. At this time, Xiaoan coughed a few times and staggered up from the ground, but it was obviously very difficult for her to even stand up. At this time, her body was slightly bent, and she stared at Song Howard. Song Howard slowly pinched his shirt cuffs and stared at Xiaoan, saying, "Again, let me see what's going on with your strange movements. Don't let me down." Super intuition. This was the ability given to him by the Sun God's badge. Song Howard didn't know how this horrible perceptive ability worked. The so-called super intuition was just a name he gave himself, but obviously it was very appropriate. Xiaoan looked at him coldly. She gradually eased the pain in her body, and at this moment, her body disappeared again. This time, both Song Howard and Song Ying saw it very clearly. It had indeed disappeared. She really disappeared, especially Song Howard. In his super intuition, Xiaoan did disappear, as if she had directly disappeared from this world. "Uncle!" Song Ying looked at Song Howard in horror. Song Howard frowned and didn't say anything. He just made a gesture to keep quiet. He still didn't see Xiaoan beside him. But at this moment, Song Howard suddenly turned around. At this moment, Xiaoan appeared behind him again. But Song Howard was one step faster, and he kicked her with his knee. The violent impact made Xiao uncover her stomach and step back. At the same time, Xiaoan stared at Song Howard, and her body disappeared again. Song Howard did not move. He stood where he was, his hands hanging down naturally. At the same time, he closed his eyes. At this moment, Xiaoan appeared behind Song Howard again. This time, Song Howard took a step to the left and dodged Xiaoan's attack. At the same time, he swung his arm and hit the side of Xiaoan's head. She had disappeared once again. Song Ying saw a very strange and unbelievable scene. Song Howard closed his eyes throughout the whole process, while Xiaoan kept attacking and disappearing. But every attack was useless, and Song Howard easily hit her. Xiaoan's expression became more and more gloomy. It was as if she was using her body to hit a hard rock, and her body was covered with cuts and bruises. Are you a monster? Once again, Xiaoan was hit to the ground. This time, she wanted to get up, but the bones in her body seemed to be broken, and the pain almost drained her of her strength. Xiaoan spat out a mouthful of blood. At this time, she could only support herself with both hands and barely sit up. Song Howard finally opened his eyes and glanced at Xiaoan. "Except for this teleportation ability, it seems that you are just an ordinary person. However, It's a pity that if your reflexes matched this ability, you would have been able to hurt me. Xiaoan gritted her teeth and stood up again. But this time, her expression changed slightly. Song Howren also noticed Xiaoan's abnormality at this time. She didn't use the teleportation ability again. Song Howren was obviously a person who knew how to grasp the enemy's psychological state. Oh, you stopped teleporting? Song Howren chuckled at this time. Let me guess. It seems that this ability of yours can't be used indefinitely. Is there any restriction? Or have you used up the number of times it can be used? Xiaoan spat out a mouthful of blood and looked fierce. Don't be complacent. Give up, you can't beat me. Song Howren said indifferently. You can't even stand up now. I don't plan to deal with you. I'm just curious about your ability. If possible, I want to ask you a few questions. But right at this moment, Song Ying suddenly cried out in pain. This distracted Song Howren. It turned out that at this moment, Paul, who was in Song Ying's arms, bit Song Ying's hand. Paul was able to leave Song Ying's arms and quickly ran toward Xiao, and Paul opened his hands in front of Xiao and looked at Song Howren angrily. This is a bit difficult. Song Howren frowned. Perhaps he and Song Ying could understand something from the conversation between the two Xiaoans, but this child obviously couldn't understand. In Paul's eyes, Song Howren, a stranger, had been beating his mother. As a child, it seemed to be natural for him to protect his mother. Surprisingly, Xiaoan suddenly carried Paul in her arms. However, the way she carried Paul was obviously not the way a mother would carry her child. Her arms were around Paul's neck, and she held a fork against his neck. Ow! Song Ying looked at Xiao and in disbelief. On the other hand, Song Howren didn't act rashly. Instead, his gaze turned cold. Using a child as a shield, even for a mercenary like him who was used to an iron-blooded life, it was an extremely shameless move. Stinky man, aren't you good at fighting? Come here. Song Howren took a deep breath and said indifferently, Isn't this your child? I've never given birth to a child. Xiaoan sneered. I'll destroy anyone who stands in my way to a better world. No one can stand in my way. Mom, I'm in pain. Mom, shut up. Xiaoan shouted coldly. I'm not your mother. Your mother killed me long ago. Stinky man, don't come here. Don't you want this child's life? Song Howren shrugged. At this moment, he had already taken a step forward. But Xiaoan obviously didn't intend to confront Song Howren directly. She held Paul and retreated little by little, until finally she turned around and left. Song Howren didn't chase her. He just looked at Song Ying and said indifferently, Go and see if anyone is dead under the stairs. We need to figure out some things. Song Ying suddenly looked at Song Howren and asked abruptly, Song Howren, am I dreaming? Well, you're not. You're awake like me. Song Howren looked at Song Ying and took a deep breath. You're so awake that you can't tell whether you're in a dream or in reality. Song Ying opened her mouth and wanted to say a lot, but she couldn't. She could only murmur, What's wrong with this world? Paul, my Paul. However, at this moment, before the two of them could check, Xiaoan, who had been severely injured by Xiaoan, had already climbed up the stairs. She pressed the bleeding wound on her waist with one hand and directly fell on the handrail of the stairs. Paul, seeing this, Song Ying hurriedly rushed forward to support him. Are you all right? Paul. Xiaoan didn't hear her. She gritted her teeth and supported herself, trying to leave. Song Howren suddenly said, Even if you can catch up to her in your current situation, can you deal with that crazy woman just now? Xiaoan had to stop. Song Howren smiled. How about cooperation? You tell me what I want to know, and I'll help you get the kid back. You saw it, right? It's easy for me to deal with her. How about that? It seemed that she had no choice. In a room in the medical room of the airport, two guards were having a conversation out of boredom. The one in the room was Han Bingjiang, who had fainted during the interrogation. But at this moment, the two guards suddenly heard a scream from the ward. It was the medical staff who had just entered the room to check on Han Bingjiang. The two of them rushed into the room and saw a nurse lying on the ground. And on the bed, the unconscious Han Bingjiang was covered with a quilt. What happened? One of the guards checked on the nurse who had fallen to the ground, while the other lifted the quilt on the bed. But after lifting the quilt, All he saw were two pillows lying horizontally on the bed. Damn it! When the guard realized what was going on, he heard the door of the ward slamming shut behind him. The two guards quickly opened the door and rushed out, but there was no one in the corridor. They couldn't help but frown and quickly called through the walkie-talkie. Call. The suspect Han Bingjiang has escaped. Sorry. I can't sit here and wait for death. I must leave this place. Han Bingjiang ran wildly, his heart in a mess. Calm down. Damn it. What time is it? If I stay, how much trouble will I get into in the future? That bitch, Xiaoan, she must be the one who framed me. She was the one who knocked me out in the end. But those useless guys said that they couldn't find her, and they didn't see her in the surveillance video? Who are you kidding? How could such a big person disappear and reappear out of thin air? Don't let me escape this time. Xiaoan, I'll make sure you can't survive in this entertainment industry. No, I'll make sure you can't survive in this industry. Absolutely. Perhaps the heavens had heard his prayers, for Han Bingjiang suddenly stopped in his tracks. That was because he could clearly see Xiaoan rushing towards him from the front. And Xiaoan was holding a child in her arms. Bitch, how dare you frame me? Han Bingjiang was furious, and his eyes were wide open. It's you. Go away. Don't block me. The moment she saw Han Bingjiang, Xiaoan's expression changed, and she seemed to have become even crazier. Han Bingjiang, you beast. Scum. Beast. Do you still want to appear in front of me? Without a word, Joanne stabbed at Han Bingjiang with her fork. She even threw Paul, who was still being held hostage, to the ground. Obviously, Han Bingjiang wasn't a well-trained person. He had made a lot of money from the entertainment industry, and his body had been hollowed out by alcohol, women, and wealth. Facing a crazy person, even if it was a woman, he couldn't stop her. He was knocked to the ground by Xiaoan. The fork in Xiaoan's hand was slowly moving towards Han Bingjiang's eyes. He could only grab Xiaoan's wrist with all his might. The two of them were in a deadlock on the ground. Han Bingjiang, you beast. Go to hell. Bitch, you. Han Bingjiang resisted with all his might, but the fork was gradually stabbing at his eyes, which made him more frightened than ever before. And Xiaoan's expression frightened Han Bingjiang even more. She looked like she was going to eat him alive. Who can save me? Han Bingjiang's eyes darted around in fear, hoping that someone could help him, even if it was those stinky policemen. But what he saw next made Han Bingjiang widen his eyes, and he felt crazier than ever. What did he see? The other Xiaoan. She was wearing a red checkered shirt, and she covered her mouth in shock, looking at Han Bingjiang in horror. And there was a young man standing next to Xiaoan. This was obviously the young man with the lost child, Paul, whom Han Bingjiang had met before everything happened. Paul! At this moment, a shrill cry came from the other side. Han Bingjiang turned his head and saw another Xiaoan running to the child who was thrown on the ground. Even though this Xiaoan was wearing a white sweater with a swollen nose and a bruised face, Han Bingjiang still recognized her. And behind the white sweater Xiaoan, Song Haoran and Song Ying were obviously following. Chapter 980. The fear belonged to Han Bingjiang, but the surprise belonged to both Song Haoran and Song Ying. Along the way, the two of them understood what had happened from the white-clothed Xiaoan, the matter of the ring and the different space-time jump. At first, Song Haoran and Song Ying thought that there were only Xiaoan and Xiaoan in white. But now there was a third Xiaoan in front of them, and this Xiaoan was with Luo Qiu. Perhaps because Joan in white caught up with him and Joan beside Luo Qiu, Joan in white was distracted. Han Bingjiang, who was extremely nervous, seized the opportunity to remove Joan's hand that was holding the fork and hit Joan's face with his forehead. The attack worked. Han Bingjiang broke free from Joan's grip. However, Xiaoan quickly stood up. This time, she didn't move. She just frowned and looked around. As for Han Bingjiang, he pressed his body against the wall of the passage in fear. He also looked to his left and right, and in front of him. Three Joans appeared in front of him. Han Bingjiang's brain could barely process all the information he received in an instant. His face was pale, and he felt dizzy. But after rubbing his eyes hard, he still felt dizzy. He muttered to himself, "Crazy, crazy. Which one are you?" Joan didn't answer Han Bingjiang immediately. She looked at Joan in the checkered shirt beside Luochio and asked in confusion, "Why is there another one?" Joan, standing beside Luochio, didn't know how to respond. She stood there stupidly. She seemed to be afraid and moved her ankle back slightly. Luochio suddenly looked at Joan and said, "The clothes you are wearing now are actually taken off by her. Do you understand now?" Xiaoan was stunned. She stared at Xiaoan, who was wearing a red checkered shirt, but she tilted her head. Suddenly, Xiaoan shouted angrily, "Impossible! Absolutely impossible! She's dead. Even the gods can't save her." "Nothing is impossible," Luochio said indifferently. "Just like what most people think, it's impossible for all three of you to appear here at the same time. You are not sisters, nor are you twins. You are each an independent individual. You are all recognized by the world in your own time and space. However, all of you are still gathered here." Luochio seemed to know something. Maybe he got it from Joan in the red checkered shirt, or maybe there was another reason. But no matter what the reason was, it seemed to be much clearer than what she knew from Joan in the white shirt. Song Ying looked at Luochio strangely. Even in the face of such an unbelievable thing, he could still be so calm. Song Haoran looked at Luochio with slight surprise. He seemed to be thinking about something. The night before returning to China, Song Haoran had a simple conversation with his dad. From his dad, Song Haoran knew about Mr. Blind's assessment of Luochio. Perhaps all the inconceivable things that happened to him were fated, and it was only natural. Later, on the plane, Song Haoran asked Mr. Blind for advice out of boredom. Mr. Blind pondered for a long time and gave the answer. So his calmness was natural? Song Haoran licked his lips. When he looked at Luochio, his eyes grew more and more interested. Probably feeling Song Haoran's gaze, Luochio looked at him casually. Song Haoran's heart skipped a beat. This once again reminded Song Haoran of the eyes of the giant serpent when he was exploring the Golden Kingdom many years ago. He also remembered the gaze of the golden statue in the temple guarded by the giant serpent. "It's almost time," Luochio suddenly said. "So, do you want to leave, or do you want me to do it? Because the three of you exist at the same time, the time and space I am in has begun to become chaotic." Chaotic time and space? Song Haoran had recovered from the memory and the intertwining gaze of Luochio. He seemed to have caught something and asked subconsciously. Luochio looked at Song Haoran and smiled slightly. This was really a bright comet with a will as hard as a rock. He nodded. "Haven't you found it yet?" "It's nearby." "Nearby?" Song Haoran was startled. Everyone, including Han Bingjiang and the three Joans, looked around subconsciously at this moment. And the surroundings were indeed strangely quiet at this moment. It was normal to be quiet in the middle of the night, but this was an airport. It was one of the busiest airports in Huan Nation. How could it become so quiet? There was no one. Except for the people involved here, there was no one around. Whether it was the corridor, the nearby shops, or even the open space downstairs of the circular promenade, even the escalators, everything had stopped moving at this moment. It was as if they were the only ones left in the world. Where is everyone? At this time, Song Ying looked around in horror. This feeling of suddenly falling into a deathly stillness really made one's hair stand on end. All disappeared. It's not that people have disappeared. Luochio shook his head. It's just that we temporarily left the normal world. Don't worry, in essence, this is still the space-time we are in, but we are in a similar world to a mirror image. Mirror image? Song Haoran repeated again. Reflection, you can think of it that way. Luochio said, "This is the first time I came in contact with this place, so I did a little research at the beginning. I'm a little late. I'm sorry." Something like an alternate dimension? Song Haoran could only respond with what he could understand. "You can think of it that way," Luochio said indifferently. "In fact, you don't have to worry too much about this. There are many mysterious disappearances in the world, and there are different names in different places, such as hidden spirits, lost, and so on. They often suddenly disappear in one place, and then suddenly appear in another place, crossing almost unimaginable distances in between. In fact, It is achieved through the mirror image of this space-time. Song Howren's heart jumped, and he suddenly said, "This woman teleported through this mirror image space." As he said that, Song Howren looked directly at Sweater Chowan, only to see that Sweater Chowan was silent at this time. He did not know what she was thinking, but at least she was quiet. After all, compared to jumping between different space-time, it is more convenient to jump back and forth between the mirror image and reality. Luochio looked at Sweater Chow, and it is more economical, right? You, Sweater Chow, and looked at Luochio and frowned. You are not from this space-time? How do you know so much about this? Compared to me, you are... No, I am not from another space-time, Luochio said indifferently. I have already said that I am here. This is the first time I have entered the mirror image space, so I could not help but spend more time to study it. That is why I am late. Humph, then what did you find out? Sweater Chow and suddenly said, and revealed a cold smile. At this time, Song quickly said, Luochio, be careful. This woman is crazy. She can teleport. I think the ring on Miss Chow and's hand should not be able to be used anymore. Luochio waved his hand, indicating that Song did not need to worry. Otherwise, she can use the ring's ability to directly leave this mirror image space. As soon as he said that, Chowan's gaze instantly turned cold and unfriendly. No wonder, no wonder. Han Bingjong looked at Sweater Chow and with fear, and his voice attracted almost everyone. No wonder those guys said that they suddenly could not find you in the video. So this is it. You teleported back and forth between here and reality, avoided the surveillance, and then framed me. You evil woman. Who is more noble than who? Han Bingjong, in this world, have you never done anything wrong? Sweater Chow sneered disdainfully. Do you dare to say that you have never done anything illegal? It is very common for people like you to do such things. In order to gain attention and fame, you are full of lies and fabrications. Do you think you are a good person? Han Bingjong's face turned red from the sarcasm. But there were many people here, and he was not as afraid of this crazy woman as he was at the beginning. He immediately sneered. No matter what, I am not as cruel as you, killing people. Ha ha ha. Sweater Chow could not help but laugh. I am ending people's lives, and you're ending people's lives. Compared to me, do you think your sins are very light? Han Bingjong, do you know why you are here at this airport today? Han Bingjong was stunned. Why was he here at this airport? At first, it was because he had received information that the female celebrity Chow had a boyfriend and wanted to bring him home to meet her parents. His eyes suddenly widened, and he said in disbelief, that anonymous information, was it you who provided it? Is there really a coincidence in this world? Sweater Chow sneered. I remember that if I want to be Chow of this time and space, I naturally have to prepare myself well. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for being too famous. Han Bingjong, scum beast trash. No matter in which time and space, you are so disgusting. You are just like a stinking bug. You deserve to die. Bitch, I have cut it off. Unexpectedly, Sweater Chow suddenly smiled strangely. In other time and space, I have cut it off. As a man, I have cut it off. I will kill you. Han Bingjong's eyes were red, and he madly rushed towards Sweater Chow. But at this moment, Sweater Chow's body magically disappeared, leaving Han Bingjong in the air. His body continued to move forward, but at the same time, Han Bingjong felt a sharp pain on his back. After disappearing, Sweater Chow appeared again and directly stabbed the fork in her hand into Han Bingjong's back. Han Bingjong screamed and fell to the ground. Song Howren whistled slightly at this time and muttered, This woman still has a last resort. What a ruthless character. After falling to the ground, Han Bingjong painfully turned over, but at this time, Sweater Chow had already stabbed Han Bingjong's chest with the fork in her hand. The fork stabbed directly into his chest. Sweater Chow laughed crazily at this moment, holding the fork with both hands, and stabbed Han Bingjong's chest and abdomen. Blood splashed, splashing on her cheeks and splashing on her lips that was brighter than any lipstick. Someone save me. Save me. Save me. I will do anything you want. Save me. Every time the fork pierced through his body, Han Bingjiang's body would instinctively twitch. At this moment, the pain caused his neck to tighten. His entire head desperately leaned back. His eyes were completely open, as if they were being held up by something. Tears poured out, and his hand reached forward. In the midst of his painful cries, his fingers were also trembling. This was a very violent and bloody way to kill. It was so bloody that Xiaoan, who was wearing a red checkered shirt, suddenly covered her mouth and made a retching gesture. She held Luocchio's shoulder uncomfortably. "What should we do?" He will die. Do you want to save him?" Luocchio suddenly asked. Red shirt Xiaoan's eyes slightly shook. "No matter what, it's a human life. Even if this man intends to destroy your life." "As Xiaoan?" Luocchio said indifferently. "If there's no accident, this man will destroy your current stardom in your life. Of course, there may be some variables which may prevent him from succeeding in the end, but it can't change the fact that he used this method to gain benefits for himself. Then, in the face of such a person, are you willing to save him?" Red shirt Xiaoan opened her mouth slightly, but stopped on second thought. I. She then looked at Han Bingjiang. She watched as the man struggled less and less under the torture. Eventually, he even stopped struggling. She still didn't say a word. "It's a pity that you don't plan to save him," Luocchio said indifferently. Even if I want to save him, I can't save him. He can't be saved." Red shirt Xiaoan gritted her teeth. "It's impossible to save him." "Maybe you're right," Luocchio suddenly said at this time. "At least if we want to change Han Bingjiang's designated death in this place, the cost is too high." At the same time, Luocchio suddenly raised his head, looking at the sky. Faint light, faint sound. The sound of everything seemed to come from all around. When the faint light reflected in everyone's eyes, they all raised their heads subconsciously. In the air, the light blue faint light was gathering. The girl was about 11 or 12 years old, with soft and smooth dark blue long hair. Her figure was light and graceful, and she wore a gorgeous dark blue dress. Her eyes were closed, and her soft blue long hair was slightly scattered in the air. Finally, the young girl slowly opened her eyes. Her eyes were like the sea, showing a deep blue color. Intelligent Manager of All Uses Araya, serial number 003. Chapter 981. The blue-haired, blue-eyed girl floating in the air, with such a form and the floating brilliance around her, perhaps could only be done with a super-realistic CG. In reality. But now it was reality. The girl named Araya, who claimed to be 003, slowly landed. Her gentle posture was like a falling feather. After landing, Araya went straight to Luocchio. This little girl? Why does she seem to know Luocchio? Song Ying was still calm at this time. This was probably the result of the mercenary family's training. After experiencing the zombie incident in the hospital, she learned that the world was not simple, so she was still calm. Song Howard did not answer. She just watched this scene with full concentration. She did not even blink for fear of missing this scene. Han Bingjiang was already dead, but blood still flowed out of his wounds, and soon a pool of blood formed on the ground. Sweater Jones stood up shakily and stared at Alea. She seemed to be a little scared. As for White Shirt Joan, since she found Paul, she had been holding Paul tightly in her arms like holding a doll. She looked absent-minded. When Araya finally came in front of Luocchio, Red Shirt Joan shrunk her neck in fear and instinctively took a few steps back. Only Araya, who was as tall as Luoccio's chest, raised her head at this time. So one could see that the blue-haired, blue-eyed girl had no expression on her face. Such a delicate, flawless face. Question: does the Origin authority holder want to intervene in the space-time chaos caused by Number 3's appearance? Araya's voice was not angry, and there was no cadence, but it was very pleasant to the ears. Origin authority holder? Luocchio blinked and suddenly asked, "Me?" Question: does the Origin authority holder want to intervene in the space-time chaos caused by Number 3's appearance? Araya repeated the question mechanically. What does an Origin authority holder represent? Luocchio frowned. This seemed to be a good opportunity to understand the truth of the shop behind him. Without a doubt, this mirror world was created by the will of the main world. This girl called herself a manager. So could she represent a part of the will of the main world? Question again. Does the origin authority holder wish to interfere with the space-time chaos caused by the appearance of the Third Lord? Luaccio pondered for a moment, then said, "If I want to interfere, what do you plan to do?" Answer. Administrator number 00 Araya is a sub-administrator. The root authority has the authority to rewrite any program and is higher than the sub-administrator number 003 Araya. The sub-administrator cannot interfere. The blue-clothed, blue-haired, blue-eyed Araya was still speaking emotionlessly. After a moment of silence, Luaccio suddenly glanced at the people nearby, especially Song Howren and Song Ying. Unexpectedly, the girl named Araya suddenly said, "Question, this map has unnecessary interference factors. Would you like to erase it as an administrator? If you erase it, it'll be very difficult for me." Luaccio shook his head. Understood. Araya nodded slightly, then suddenly said, "Question, as the origin authority holder, why are you being biased?" Question, unable to understand. Luaccio said calmly, "You said that my authority is higher than yours. Then what I want to do should not be restricted by you. In other words, even if I don't explain, it's fine." Affirmative. A manager cannot interfere with the origin authority holder. Araya nodded again and said, "Question, does the origin authority holder wish to interfere with the space-time chaos caused by the appearance of the Third Lord?" Luaccio thought for a moment, amidst the different silence of the crowd. Finally, Luaccio slowly said, "If I do not intend to interfere, what will you do?" Answer, let everything return to normal. Remove the factor that should not exist in the Third Lord's world. At the same time, implant connected memories in everyone present. The cause of death of the deceased human will be changed. Suggested cause of death is a fall from a high altitude, head rupture, immediate death. Araya pointed at Han Bingjiang in front of Luaccio. He was already dead. Luaccio, however, frowned. Everyone involved? Then, does that include everyone outside the airport? Affirmative. A manager can do it perfectly. Luaccio then said, "What do you intend to do with the 3 Jones here?" Araya said, "Answer, recommend the main plan. Keep the one with the stronger consciousness and restore the original trajectory. The other 2 will be banished to the crevice of space-time. They may survive or become food for the void primordial demon." How do you prove who is stronger? Luaccio asked curiously. Answer, humans have a strong will to live. Therefore, the one with the strongest will survive. Araya said slowly, "Suggestion, carry out the simplest struggle for survival." At this moment, the moment Araya finished speaking, the 3 Jones were suddenly pulled into the air by an invisible pulling force. Red Joan and White Joan screamed at the same time. Even Paul, who was in White Joan's arms, was not spared from being pulled into the air. Chowan was the only one who seemed rather calm at this moment. At the same time, a steel plate appeared out of thin air. After the steel plate appeared, it began to multiply crazily. Then, like waves, it rolled in all directions and finally paved a huge steel platform in the air. At this moment, the ground corresponding to this steel platform suddenly disappeared. It was pitch black as far as the eye could see. It turned into an abyss. Explanation. Below is the crevice of the dimension. Falling means failure. The last remaining individual will return to the normal trajectory. In the face of Araya's incredible ability, Song Howren and Song Ying only felt so small. Both of them were already soaked in sweat, but they could not open their mouths to speak. They did not know when it started, but they could not open their mouths. They could only listen and watch, as if they had become forgotten objects. That's really simple. Luaccio also looked at the creation of the platform and the 3 Jones who landed on it. Simple and primitive, but why bring this child up? Explanation. For the same reason. Luaccio nodded and glanced at Red Joan, whom he had saved. As expected, then, the main plan you mentioned just now, does that mean there is a backup plan? Confirmation. If the return target cannot be determined before the end of the time limit, the administrator will personally eliminate all individuals and then create a new individual to join the original trajectory. Time? Answer: before the boundary point of the space-time disorder. How long more? Calculation: 293 seconds. Just as Luaccio and Araya were asking questions and answering questions, a furious roar came. It was not Joan in the sweatshirt, but Joan in the red checkered shirt. Red Joan stood at the edge of the platform, trembling. She looked at Luaccio and Araya. What kind of joke is this? How can you decide the life and death of others so casually? What gives you the right? Put me down. Explanation: the administrator has the ability to rewrite the original trajectory of number 03. It is also his duty. Individual request denied. Red-clothed Johann yelled in horror. Why did I accept this? I'm the real one. She roared madly and pointed at Joan in the sweatshirt and Joan in the black. They're the fake ones. Why do I have to be with them? This is not fair. Not fair. Put me down. Put me down. I'm the real one. Why? Answer: the individual's request has been denied. Araya said emotionlessly. Reminder: 263 seconds to the end point. Johann glanced at the abyss below the steel platform in horror. Just a glance was enough to make him feel like the endless abyss was going to swallow him up. Chowan looked at Luo unwillingly, begging, "Help me. I beg you. I will do anything you want me to do. Save me. Aren't you an authority holder? Didn't this girl say that as long as you nod, she can't stop you? So please, save me. I am the real one. I am the real one. Trust me. Trust me." Luo said, "At present, all three of you are real, and none of you is fake. The only difference is that you come from different time and space. Since this is the decision of the world's consciousness, I am sorry, but I don't intend to change it. Besides, there is no reason to do so." How? Red Joan fell to the ground, as if she had lost her soul and turned into an empty shell. But at that moment, an excited laughter came from behind her. The source of the laughter was Chow, the sweater. Red Coat Chow, and looked at the crazy red coat Chow, and in fear. His body couldn't help but tremble, and he hugged himself tightly with both hands. At this moment, Chow was walking towards Chow and step by step with the fork in her hand. His eyes were cold, and his smile was cruel. Red Joan chuckled. "You were scared, right?" "That's right, because I had the same fight as you when I was the manager for the first time. But it doesn't matter. You won't be scared soon, because you will disappear forever, and I will become you." Have you experienced it?" Red-clothed Chow and looked up nervously at the demon-like guy who was walking towards him. "Sometimes yes. Sometimes no. Sometimes, if you kill them fast enough, they will be allowed to exist by default." Red Joan sneered, "But sometimes those guys are stubborn and can't be killed in a short time. So I'll be dragged into this place with them." 003. It seems that there are many so-called Araya, but they're all the same, and the way they solve the problem is the same. So boring. Don't come here. Don't come here." Red Joan moved back subconsciously, but soon her palm touched nothing. Behind her was the dimensional crevice below. Red Joan was so scared that she quickly crawled to the side. There's one thing that Aleo was right about. Sweater Johann slowly walked towards Red Coat Johann and sneered. That is, only those who can adapt to the environment and have a stronger will can survive better and deserve to live. You guys are born lucky, so why should you enjoy the happiness you already have? What qualifications do you have? Suddenly, Sweatshirt Chow and raised his leg and kicked Red Shirt Chow. He said ferociously, "You don't have the right. Only me. Only I should enjoy more and better things." This kick was so powerful that it caused Xiao to roll over. Part of her body had already rolled over the edge of the steel platform. Because of fear, Xiao tried to get up in a panic. However, her legs had already slipped off the edge of the platform. She lost her balance in the panic and fell down the edge of the platform. She screamed in horror. Luckily, Red Joan's hands touched the edge of the steel platform at the last moment. She didn't fall down. But unfortunately, she only put herself in more danger. She was almost in a hopeless situation. This is just to make you struggle for a while. Sweater Xiao and stepped on red gown Xiao and's fingers that were gripping the edge of the platform with ease. She rubbed them slightly and said, "Give up. Your life is over." Looking at Red Joan, who was about to lose, and Red Joan, who had the upper hand, Luochio suddenly asked, "My identity as a so-called root authority holder should be given to me by the shop behind me. So what does the shop mean to you?" Alea's eyes glowed with a faint blue light. The light dispersed and gathered together again, as if it was thinking. Question. Can't understand. Luochio frowned. In this mirrored space, the connection between him and the club seemed to be cut off, but it wasn't very obvious. It was probably like a sponge in the middle of the transmission of electric waves in the air. Even you can't answer it. Luochio shook his head disappointedly. So, even the will of the main world can't answer it. Question. Can't understand. Denial. The will of the world dominates everything. There should be no unexplainable phenomenon. The sub-manager can't represent everything. Although the tone was still emotionless, it gave people the feeling that he was eager to prove something. Luochio just shook his head, then smiled and patted Araya's head. "Okay, I won't ask anymore, and I don't mean to doubt the will of the world." Question. Can't understand the meaning behavior. Luochio just smiled and retracted his hand, then looked up at the steel platform. Araya tilted his head. Seeing that Luochio didn't ask any more questions, he also looked at the steel platform. Wei stepped on Red Spectre Qiao and's finger and laughed sinisterly. But she didn't make Red Spectre Qiao and give up completely. At this moment, a black shadow suddenly appeared behind Red Joan. Red Joan's body was knocked off the edge of the steel platform. Chapter 982. Paul, what do you want to eat for dinner? His mother asked. However, the child who was being asked walked to the window of a shop on the side of the street. He stuck his whole face to the glass and looked at the things inside the window. He was completely attracted by the things inside. It was a very exquisite box. His mother looked up at the name of the shop. It turned out to be a boutique. The box in the window was really exquisite. She couldn't help but look at it. Pa, do. The child was trying to read the name marked on the pedestal below the box, the name of this decorative box. Pandora. The mother bent down and leaned against the child's back. She smiled and said, Pandora, this is Pandora's box, Paul. Pandora's box? The child named Paul curiously raised his head and saw his mother's chin. His mother said seriously, Pandora's box is a terrible box, containing countless disasters and misfortunes. Once you open it, not only yourself, but also others will be hurt. The child opened his mouth slightly, then lowered his head to look at the box in the cupboard again. He still lost his initial interest, and the child's curiosity was soon transferred to other places. On the opposite side of the road, a street artist was performing. Mom, go look at that. The child pointed to the person who was suspended in the air with only a crutch. His eyes suddenly lit up, and he quickly ran over. Be careful. Paul, don't run across the road. His mother shook her head helplessly. Of course, the reason why she didn't rush over immediately was that she looked at the front and back of the road. There were basically parked cars here. Take the sidewalk. How many times have I told you? You're really a child. Nevertheless, the child had safely walked to the artist who was suspended and watched with many passers-by. His mother smiled. What a curious child. She planned to go over, but after leaving, she looked back at the box in the window. Pandora's box, so expensive. Fortunately, she glanced at the price below the box and couldn't help but feel lucky that the child didn't ask for it. However, the moment she turned back to look at her child, she froze on the spot. A loud noise came from the front. The child, who had safely crossed the road, was directly pressed to the ground by a huge billboard. Not only the child, but also the performing street artist and several audience members. She opened her mouth slightly, and the shopping basket in her hand fell to the ground. She then ran across the road like a madwoman. Before her tears could fall out of her eyes, a car was speeding through the small road. She was sent flying by the impact of her mother's attack. Her last gaze rested on the box in the display window. She didn't have time to feel sorrow or pain. She only subconsciously thought, What an ominous box. The driver who got out of the car hurriedly ran over. However, when he arrived at the place where the woman he hit and rolled out, the woman mysteriously disappeared. Her body had completely fallen towards the bottom of the steel platform. She was facing the abyss below the steel platform, the so-called dimensional crack, Sweater Joanne. And the one who had been in a trance after hugging Paul was obviously the white-clothed Joanne who had been in a trance. Red-clothed Joanne's hands were still tightly grasping the edge of the steel platform. Although her fingers were badly damaged, she still held on. She couldn't change the fate of being pushed out of the steel platform. She just hurriedly looked back at the white-clothed Joanne who had sneakily attacked her from behind. White-clothed Joanne's face was full of panic. Even her hands were trembling. But her push had created an absolute advantage for her. No one can separate me and Paul. No one can separate me and Paul. No one. You're really the same as me. Sweater Joanne sneered, looking at white-clothed Joanne with a strange look. It seemed to be a look of approval. Finally, Sweater Joanne's body directly fell down. Perhaps one of them had been eliminated and red-clothed Joanne was in a precarious situation. White-clothed Joanne had basically secured the victory. But at this moment, red-clothed Joanne felt that her body suddenly became much heavier, and her fingers that were grasping the edge of the steel platform were almost broken. Red-clothed Joanne cried out in pain, at the same time looking down in horror. It was Sweater Joanne. She didn't completely fall into the abyss below, but grasped her ankle. Her body was swaying in the air, and each swing brought a great burden to red-clothed Joanne. Let me go. Let me go. What terrified Xiao, and even more, was that Xiao was like a demon that had crawled out of hell. She grabbed Xiao's legs and pulled herself up with all her might. Sweater Joanne grabbed red-clothed Joanne's thigh and waist, climbing up bit by bit. Let me go. Let me go. In horror, red-clothed Joanne crazily kicked Sweater Joanne's head with her leg. However, no matter how much strength red-clothed Joanne used, and how badly she kicked red-clothed Joanne's face, she didn't loosen her grip on red-clothed Joanne's leg at all. She kicked out several of Joanne's teeth, and when she opened her mouth, she looked terrified. Red-clothed Joanne's nose was bent, but her eyes were still wide open. She looked like a demon that wanted to take her life. Sweater Joanne's persistence made red-clothed Joanne shudder. I want to stay until the end. Everything belongs to me. Sweater Joanne roared furiously, grasping red-clothed Joanne's clothes tightly. Please, let me go. Red-clothed Joanne had to beg. But at this moment, red-clothed Joanne's face slightly changed. This made red-clothed Joanne raise her head subconsciously. A figure was standing in front of her. It was white-clothed Joanne who had fallen down the steel platform together with them. She wouldn't forget white-clothed Joanne's existence, because she was the one who had pushed red-clothed Joanne down the steel platform just now. Now, both red-clothed Joanne and red-clothed Joanne were in an absolute disadvantage. At this moment, if white-clothed Joanne directly pried red-clothed Joanne's hand away from the edge of the platform, both of them would fall into the abyss. And white-clothed Joanne and red-clothed Joanne would become the winner of this struggle for survival. I just want to be with Paul, happily together. White-clothed Joanne opened her eyes slightly, her voice trembling, but her expression was cold. Compared to the crazy red-clothed Joanne, white-clothed Joanne's expression scared red-clothed Joanne more. Don't, red-clothed Joanne hurriedly said. You're not that kind of person. You're not like her. You're not. You're not, right? White-clothed Joanne didn't seem to hear it. She slowly lifted her leg. Both red-clothed Joanne and red-clothed Joanne widened their eyes at the same time, because white-clothed Joanne suddenly stomped down after she lifted her leg. Thud! Her shoe heavily stepped on the edge of the steel platform. At this moment, red-clothed Joanne tightly grasped red-clothed Joanne's hands, but she couldn't catch anything. Red-clothed Joanne instantly disappeared and reappeared in an instant. However, at this moment, red-clothed Joanne had directly fallen into the abyss below. In the rapid fall, red-clothed Joanne stared at the top. At this moment, her eyes collided with red-clothed Joanne's. She saw red-clothed Joanne's face suddenly show a cold smile. "So are you." Red-clothed Joanne suddenly laughed out loud. "So are you. So are you. So are you. Ha ha. So are you. Ha ha ha." At this moment, her wild laughter accompanied her descent and gradually faded into the distance. In the end, the dark abyss completely swallowed her. 3. Only 2 left. Just now, did the red-clothed Joanne disappear and reappear in an instant? Song Howard didn't know when he could speak. Maybe he and Song didn't ask anything about the background of Luocio and Araya, so they were pardoned. Just now, did she? Song was puzzled. Yes. Luocio, who was not far away, looked over and said indifferently, "She did appear and disappear for a moment. Generally speaking, it should be the same as Joanne in a sweater you met before. By switching between reality and the mirror image, she achieved the effect of instantaneous movement." Song Howard was stunned, frowning. "No, she is not the original." "I see, I understand." "What do you understand?" Song suddenly raised her head. Song Howard looked at the steel platform and said slowly, "I'm afraid that the Qiao that the outsiders know has already been replaced. Apart from that, I can't explain why the Joanne in the original world also knows the skill of switching between reality and the mirror image. Could it be that when we saw Qiao in the guardhouse, she was already—" Song opened her mouth in surprise. But if she switched back and forth, then when she switched back to reality, she should still be in her original position. Her body should be falling down as well. How did she stay in the same place after returning to the mirror image world? Song Howard said indifferently, "I'm afraid it's an illusion." Just as she was about to switch, she suddenly bent her arm forcefully and forced her body to grow a little taller. When she switched to the mirror image world, her hands were freed and stretched out at the same time. In this way, her arms can reach a longer distance. As he spoke, Song Howard pointed at the steel platform. "Look carefully. The one in red is not only holding onto the edge of the platform, but she's also holding onto Qiao and ankle. This is probably the best proof." "She can do that?" Song looked at Luocio in disbelief. Subconsciously, she felt that Luocio was the one who could give the answer. "Something like that." Luocio nodded. Araya's eyes fell on Song Howard and suddenly said, "Excellent individual. Thank you for the compliment." Song Howard looked at Araya, suppressing the crazy beating of his heart, trying not to lose his composure. But Araya did not continue to observe Song Howard and said slowly, "Calculation. The remaining time is 105 seconds. That's enough." As if to demonstrate to Araya, red-clothed Joanne suddenly pulled white-clothed Joanne's ankle and pulled her down from the platform. White-clothed Joanne did not have the crazy and adaptable ability of red-clothed Joanne. She directly fell into the abyss onto the steel platform. "Paul!" While she was falling, she shouted something loudly. She opened her fingers and scratched in the air. The crack of the dimension also swallowed her. 3. 1 left. Finally, after red-clothed Joanne and white-clothed Joanne both fell into the abyss, red-clothed Joanne climbed up the steel platform with difficulty. She directly fell on the platform, gasping for breath. Then red-clothed Joanne slowly stood up and then looked down at Araya. She smiled and then said loudly, "I won. So, you already knew about it all along. Yet, you pretended to be innocent." Song took a deep breath. "You already knew about it when we were in the guardroom?" Red-clothed Joanne smiled casually and then shook her head. "No, I didn't know it at that time. It wasn't until you brought the child that I realized what had happened. In this time and space, there was another fellow who had also jumped over. That's what I thought at that time, but I didn't expect that there was not only one, but 2. You fooled all of us." Song smiled bitterly. "In my original time and space, I was an actress." Red-clothed Joanne sneered. "I was an even better actress than Joanne in this time and space. Should I say that my acting skills are too good? Or are you too stupid? Damn it, what an annoying face." Song Ying gritted her teeth. Luochio looked at red-clothed Joanne and suddenly asked, "Can you tell me one thing? When I found you, you didn't have the ring on your body. How did you change yourself freely?" "Ring," red-clothed Joanne smiled, and then tore off the button of her shirt, revealing half of her chest. "Is it really good to wear such a precious thing? I sewed it inside long ago." She put her finger on the soft part of her chest. "I see." Luochio nodded. If it was a woman's private part, he would not take the initiative to check it. "But, thank you so much." Red-clothed Joanne smiled. "It was so dangerous. I thought I would be eliminated by that crazy guy at the beginning. I really thought I was going to die. Thank you so much for saving me and letting me recover so well. Otherwise, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to hold on until now. You're also good-looking. When I go back, can you be my boyfriend? How about that? I'm good at serving people." "Disgusting." Song Ying couldn't help cursing in a low voice, and then quickly looked at Luochio, as if she was afraid that he would agree. However, Luochio suddenly frowned. No one knew what he was thinking. "I've already won. Why aren't you putting me down?" Red-clothed Joan shouted again. "I've also participated in other survival fights in other spaces. I know the rules. Put me down and leave this damn place." "You emotionless thing." "Refused. The survival fight is not over yet. The unstable factor still exists. Reminder, time remaining, 60 seconds. Araya's voice was still emotionless. "Are you kidding me? They've all fallen down. I'm the only one left." Suddenly, red-clothed Joan seemed to have thought of something and immediately looked at a place on the platform. There, Paul was standing blankly with a pale face and didn't know what to do. Seeing red-clothed Joan looking at him, he even subconsciously shrank his body. Red-clothed Joan opened her eyes wide, and her expression changed greatly. "Could it be? I think you're mistaken about one thing, Miss Joanne of an unknown space," Luochio said indifferently. "The reason why I saved you is not that you need to live, but to give a chance to the little life that's being born in your body." "What do you mean?" Song Ying was stunned. Luochio sighed. "She's pregnant." Yin 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 yin. Chapter 983. She is a pregnant woman? Song Ying covered her mouth in surprise, and Song Howren frowned. Most of the time, people's attitude towards pregnant women was subtle. This woman might be evil, and this woman might be hated by everyone, but when this woman had a little life in her body, her situation would be a little different. She might not be forgiven, but the little life in her body was innocent. A pure and spotless life would always be loved by others. Our respect for pregnant women was because of her greatness in giving birth to life. "This is too cruel." Song Ying's face was pale. There was only 7 or 8 years old Paul on the stage, and the little life in red-dressed Xiao In's belly. Only one of them was allowed to live. For a moment, when Song Ying looked at Araya again, this blue-haired, blue-eyed girl no longer made her feel delicate and cute, but inexplicably scared. Because all this was done under her will. She was the one who set up such a cruel struggle for survival, and she was the one who created this cruel situation with her own hands. Red-dressed Xiao En, who was on the steel platform, stood there blankly as if she was struck by lightning. She lowered her head and stroked her abdomen. Her hair covered her face, and her sadness, joy, and disgust couldn't be seen. Only her slightly trembling shoulders were so clear. "It can't be like this. It can't be like this." Song Ying suddenly looked agitated, quickly walked to Luochio and grabbed his arm. "This is unreasonable. This is unreasonable. Think of a way. Think of a way. I've already said that I won't interfere with Araya's work." Luochio shook his head. "Since I have said so, we can only wait for the result. But this is too strange. It's too strange." Song Ying grabbed Luochio's arm with both hands. "It's too unreasonable. Why must there be such a choice? Paul is just a child. What's wrong with him surviving? There are so many people in the world, so many billions of people, can't even accommodate such a small life." Luochio was silent for a moment. Song Ying was so anxious that she was a little scared. She said in a trembling voice, "Quick, think of something." "Time, there's no time." Araya had already said that there were only 60 seconds left, and at this moment, time was quickly passing by. Perhaps there was less than half of the time left, or perhaps even less. Conservation, Luocio finally said. What? Song Ying was stunned. Song Howren, who was behind her, was also stunned. It's probably similar to the conservation of mass, Luocio sighed and said, physically, everything on Earth conforms to the conservation of energy. Liquids, solids, and gases were interchangeable. Humans should be in this cycle. Souls. If souls had weight, they should also be included in the cycle of conservation. Since they were all conservationists, even if there was only a slight increase in any one of them, everything would become chaotic and the current balance would no longer be maintained. Even at this stage, speaking of this, Luocio suddenly stopped and glanced at Araya. The girl was just paying attention to the changes on the steel platform. At the same time, she slowly stretched out her arm. Luocio knew that time was approaching the limit. The steel plates on the spread steel platform began to crack and fall off, falling into the abyss below, which meant that the space left for Joan and Paul was rapidly shrinking. The huge steel plates fell from midair and sank into the abyss in an instant without any sound. But it was this silence that made people feel scared. Time seemed to stop at this moment. When the space left for Joan and Paul to move was very small, the peeling steel plates were approaching Joan's feet. She glanced down and then suddenly walked towards Paul. Behind her, the steel plates were still peeling off piece by piece. Finally, when she came in front of Paul, there were only 9 steel plates left, showing a 9-square grid. She and Paul stood in the middle of the steel plate at the same time. Paul, are you? Joan suddenly asked, and reached out to touch Paul's cheek. Mommy? Paul looked at Xiao untimidly. She suddenly asked in a low voice, Do you know who changed your name? Paul shook his head blankly. I don't know. Joan squatted down slowly and looked at Paul's face from bottom to top. Her voice became gentle. I have a child in my belly. I'm about to give birth to a child. Although Paul doesn't know who gave you your name, the baby in my body doesn't have a name yet. Paul, do you know? Joan's hand slowly fell down, grasping Paul's wrist. Mom! Paul was frightened. I'm scared, because at this moment, the remaining 9 steel plates had once again peeled off for the 4 corners. The remaining 5 plates were in the shape of cross. Paul, good boy, don't be scared. Joan's voice became softer. By the way, Paul, have you seen your father? When Paul heard the word father, he covered his ears. He seemed to be very afraid of hearing this name. Joan slightly opened her mouth, but soon she stood up and hugged Paul tightly. Don't be scared. Don't be scared. Come on, listen. Can the baby in my belly hear anything? At this moment, the steel plates peeled off again. 4 of the remaining 5 steel plates peeled off at this moment, leaving Joan and Paul standing on one of the steel plates. Araya reached out her other hand, which meant that the time she gave was up, but the result was not out yet. She would carry out the backup plan, which was to erase these unstable factors and then create a new one, putting it into the original time and space track. Target locked. Erase program started. At the center of Araya's palms, faint light began to gather. They soon turned into blue and white light balls. Within the 2 balls of light, Song Howren felt despair. He could feel that the 2 balls of light contained an enormous amount of power. Can you wait a moment? At this moment, Luocio suddenly put his hand on Araya's wrist and looked at Araya. Araya tilted her head and looked at Luocio confusedly. Request? Order? If it's a request, will you refuse? Luocio stared into Araya's eyes. The blue light in her eyes started to spread out and then gathered quickly. Araya directly said, Yes. The time limit has reached, and the erase must be carried out. Luocio pondered for a moment. During this moment, Araya ignored him. The 2 light balls were about to shoot out. Luocio then said, Order. The light balls in Araya's palms suddenly froze. Except, Child Administrator Araya, Serial 003, temporarily suspended the erase program. The program has been suspended. After saying that, Araya slowly put down his hands and looked at Luocio. Report. The time limit has reached. The unstable factor will affect this space-time. Currently calculating. Actually, there's still time left, right? Luaccio looked at Araya. Since 2 people have been eliminated in a row, it means that the original burden have been reduced by a lot. In this case, it could delay the time. Araya's eyes kept flashing. He even closed his eyes directly. After a few seconds, he said, starting to adjust the time limit, adjusting. Araya fell into silence. Seeing this, Soning could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. When she looked at Luaccio, she showed a relieved smile. I was right about you. No. Luaccio shook his head. I just wanted to test if the so-called root authority can really order Araya. When the time limit is up, if there is still no result, the original ending will just be delayed a little. Anyway, Song Ying gritted her teeth. You still helped, didn't you? At least that proves that you are not the same as her. Do you know that the feeling you gave me just now is the same as the feeling Araya gave me? Luaccio did not say anything. He just turned and looked at Joan and Paul on the last steel plate silently. He suddenly asked, do you think her gentleness now is real or fake? Song Ying opened her mouth and looked at him subconsciously. At this moment, Joan's face was full of gentleness. Her lips were rippling with a kind of motherly instinct. She was like a mother who was breastfeeding her child. Real or fake, no one could tell. She said that she was an actress herself. What did you hear? There was only 1 steel plate left, but there was no fear on Joan's face. Her gaze was so gentle that it seemed to be contagious. Paul's emotions gradually calmed down. Paul raised his head and looked at Joan in confusion. Mom, I can't hear anything. You really can't hear me? Paul shook his head slowly. Chowan gently caressed her abdomen and lowered her eyes. But I can hear the child in my belly calling me mommy, mommy. Do you know that the child often talks to me? Paul opened his eyes as if he found it hard to believe. Chowan patted Paul's head. Do you want to know what this child said to me? Paul nodded. Chowan's voice became clearer. He told me, Mom, I want to come out as soon as possible. I want to see Mom. That's what he told me. So, Chowan smiled as she held Paul's armpit and lifted him up. So, if Mom wants this kid to come out and meet you, but you need Paul's help, will Paul help Mom? Yes. Paul nodded heavily. Chowan said softly, you're such a good child. Mommy will always love you. Always, always. She lifted Paul and reached out her hands to the only steel plate. Always, 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 red-dressed Xiao, and was about to let go of her hand. Once she did, Paul would fall into the abyss below, into the crevice of the dimension. No! Finally, Song Ying screamed in horror from below. Her voice was penetrating. In this empty and quiet mirror world, her voice was clearly transmitted to Joan and Paul's ears. But Joan didn't care. She just looked at Paul with a smile. Paul, do you know? Mother really wants to be your mother. I really want to give birth to you personally. But if Paul is here, Mom can't give birth to him. Mom, don't you want Paul? Paul asked with fear. I will. Red-clothed Johann suddenly said. I will take Paul. The child I gave birth to will be called Paul. Chowan loosened his hands in an instant. Paul directly fell into the abyss from the only steel platform. At this moment, Chowan's eyes were cold. She looked at the falling Paul without any expression on her face. She said indifferently, I'm not your mother. But there's one thing you should be thankful for, that is, you've seen your father, even though it's only in this space and time. Mom. The voice and the small figure quickly disappeared into the dark abyss. Only red-clothed Xiao was left on the steel plate. Song Ying's hands, which were tightly grasping Luaccio's arms, dropped down powerlessly at this moment. She looked at Joan standing on the steel platform. Her eyes gradually turned cold, as if she was looking at a dead body, a lifeless object. Why is it like this? Song Ying felt a little cold, subconsciously hugging her own body. She looked at Luaccio blankly, only to find that Luaccio didn't move at all, not even blinking his eyes. She looked at Song Howren, only to find that his face, which was always smiling, was now a little gloomy. I've already won. Chowan suddenly yelled, Alea, I really won this time. Time limit corrected. Time limit reached. Araya, who paused, finally opened her eyes. Her blue eyes glowed again, and she looked at Luaccio, Question. Do you want to continue pausing the purging process? Question. Do you want to continue pausing the purging process? Luaccio looked at Joan silently. After Araya asked for the third time, he finally said, even though there are countless dazzling pearls in the sea, there are times when they can't break out of their shells. Sometimes they can't even take shape. Do as you like, Araya. I don't care anymore. Understood. Araya nodded. Permission has been obtained. Continue the purging process. Use the backup plan to start. Joan will create again. Araya opened her hands. A ball of light was born from her hands and slowly floated out. In the air, the ball of light slowly elongated, changed shape, and finally turned into a human figure. When the light faded away from the human figure, what appeared in front of everyone was another Joan. However, this Joan was gray-white, as if she was made of clay. Based on Araya's words, this Joan wasn't from this time and space. She was a Joan who was created again. Memory, create again. Araya nodded at the forehead of the new Joan. Fusion started. Implantation of virtual soul. Implantation successful. Fusion in progress. Estimated fusion time, 400 seconds. Waiting. Seeing that the skin color of the recreated Xiao and was slowly returning to normal. Just like a person who was really asleep, Xiaoan screamed in horror. What are you doing? What are you doing? Joan screamed crazily. I've won. I've won. I'm the one who's left. I'm qualified to replace the Joan of this time and space. I'm the winner. Araya. Araya. Are you going to break your promise? Let me go. Let me go. Rejected. The victory condition hasn't been met. The unstable factor still exists. Clear the program and start again. At this moment, Alea slowly raised her palm. The ball of light, with terrifying power once again, emerged from her palm. What do you mean the victory condition hasn't been met? I'm the only one left. Joan looked at Araya in panic. Are you blind? Even Paul was thrown down by me. How can there still be unstable factor here? But Araya didn't say anything this time. This made Joan even more hysterical. Liar. You're all liars. You're just using me for fun. You're all liars. You didn't plan to let any of us go. You wanted us all to die. You took everything from me. Liars. Demons. Idiot. Suddenly, Song Howren's voice was heard. This made Joan even more agitated. Song Howren sneered. You're quite smart. Why can't you understand such a simple thing? You're the only one left on the stage. Where's the other one? Did you really win? There's another one. There's another one? Joan opened her eyes wide and turned around. However, this piece of steel plate was only 1 square meter in size. Who would be able to hide in it? Xiao kept turning his body, but all he could see was air. You lied to me. There's no one here. Who said there's no one? Song Howren squinted his eyes and sneered. He's in your body. He's the child you're carrying. Joan looked like she was struck by lightning. Don't you understand? Song Howren glanced at Araya and said, she said the winner could replace the original Joan and in our time and space. But she didn't mention the child. I'm afraid the child in your belly was conceived in another time and space, right? So for this time and space, the child itself is the biggest unstable factor. As long as you carry the child, you can't win. You're just wasting your time. Impossible. No, it can't be true. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Joan pressed her head with both hands. You're lying to me. You're all lying to me. Song Howren was a member of Jianghu and had his own set of principles. At this moment, he looked at Xiao and sneered. Heaven's sins can be forgiven, but self-inflicted sins cannot be forgiven. I don't want. Joan suddenly screamed. At this moment, she suddenly raised her hand. In her hand, there was a fork used for Western food. The fork should have been Sweater Xiaoan's. Since when did Redcoat Xiaoan have it? Doubt flashed through Song Howren's mind. Did Xiaoan accidentally fall when she pushed Xiaoan off the platform? But Song Howren didn't have time to think about it, because at this moment, Xiaoan had suddenly stabbed the fork into his own abdomen. Start. The light ball in Araya's hand flew to Joan and at high speed. The ball of light suddenly shone brightly, as dazzling as the sun. In the white light, Joan let out a shrill cry. When the light ball approached her, she raised her trembling hands, as if she was holding something in her hands of bloody life. I won. In the end, the blazing white light swallowed everything. All sight, all feeling. When the light gradually dissipated, the steel plate could no longer be seen in the air. Naturally, red-clothed Johann could no longer be seen either. But it didn't mean the end, because the recreated Joan and didn't open her eyes. Are people really that scary? Song-Ying looked at Song Howard blankly. In the end, did she give? Song Howard didn't say anything. At least, he has been here. Although he didn't open his eyes and didn't see the mother who gave birth to him, he has indeed been here. It was Luocchio's voice. When Song-Ying looked back, Luochio walked forward and then jumped into the dark abyss without warning. Wait for me here. Chapter 984. When Song-Ying reacted, Luochio's figure had completely disappeared into the bottomless abyss below. It was too late for her to stop him. Song Howard! Song-Ying shouted in horror at the only person she could rely on in this mirror world. What should we do? Wait. Song Howard said calmly at this time, and at the same time glanced at Araya. Since even she has to accept Luochio's orders, what do we have to worry about? But this. Song-Ying still wanted to say something. But Song Howard shook his head, motioning Song-Ying to be quiet. After all, as a parent, Song-Ying nodded helplessly in the end, even though she was often not very dignified. But she stared at the abyss, and the worry on her face grew stronger. She had a lot of questions that she wanted to ask clearly. Suddenly, Song-Ying finally understood why Luochio had no interest in staying in the Song family. If he had such an incredible power behind him, then how insignificant was the Song family to him? Song Howard suddenly walked towards Araya with his hands behind his back. The young master of the Song family who had been courting death looked quite relaxed at this time. Of course, he was not as frivolous as he usually was when hitting on women. A carrot, Leia. Song Howard finally came in front of Araya, smiled, and said, "This should be the Sanskrit pronunciation of the name Araya, right?" The blue-haired girl floated up at this time. Her body slowly turned, facing Song Howard, but she did not speak. Song Howard suddenly became so serious that Song-Ying felt that he was not her uncle. He said, "Can I keep the memory of this time?" When Song Howard's question came out, Song-Ying abruptly turned around. She remembered some words that Araya had said. All of this would be erased, the rules would be restarted, and the memories of all related people would be modified. Negative, request denied. You must not divulge anything about the mirror image world and your own administrator. Song Howard seemed to have known that Araya would give such an answer. He wasn't surprised. Instead, he said boldly, "What if this is Luochio's request? Will you erase our memories of this time?" Araya slowly said, "Negative. The Origin Authority did not issue a specific command." Song Howard still appeared quite relaxed. He even smiled and said, "But how do you know that he won't give this order? You see, he's not here for the time being. And I can't be sure of this, right?" Araya was silent, and the faint blue light in his pupils once again slowly dispersed, as if he was thinking. Song Howard struck while the iron was hot. "Of course, I'm not sure if I'll agree to this. I'm worried that he won't agree, but you're worried that he will." Araya suddenly said, "Negative. The Origin Authority has the right to issue any command to the sub-administrator. The command must be obeyed. The sub-administrator, Araya number 003, does not need to worry." Song Howard was stunned, and then said helplessly, "Then I'm the only one worried. But, for now, you and I can't be sure of this. This is certain, right?" Araya nodded for the first time. "Agreed." Song Howard finally showed a smile on his face. "So, before he comes back, at least we have to wait until he comes back before we can make a decision. Then, as for the current situation, we can only keep the original status quo, right?" Araya didn't say anything. Song Howard seemed to have succeeded in his scheme, and his eyes slightly curved. But he didn't know that Song-Ying was actually worried to death at this moment. This was not the kind of harmless little girl that one could see on the streets. Araya had all kinds of incredible powers, and could even directly create people. Song, death-seeking Howren really deserved his reputation. Song Howren turned back and gave Song Ing a reassuring look, and then continued to look at Araya and said, "There's one thing I'm very curious about. Just now, the Fu Chiao ANS mentioned that they had met you in other space-time. And you have a serial number, so can I assume that in different space-time, they're the same you, but with different serial numbers?" Araya didn't answer. Song Howren just smiled. "Then I can assume that this guess is correct, right? Then, how many are there in total?" Araya still didn't answer, but this time she made another move. That was, she stretched out her arm toward Song Howren and opened her palm. Song Howren's heart suddenly jumped, but he was used to seeing big scenes, so he had already trained himself to remain calm even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him. He asked in a low voice, "Did I ask something I shouldn't ask? If so, I apologize and promise not to ask related questions. How about it?" Bang! There was a sudden explosion. Song Howren suddenly released his hands behind his back, and his expression changed slightly. The source of the explosion was his hands behind his back, the mobile phone in his hands. Song Howren looked at the fragments of the mobile phone that had exploded and scattered on the ground, and his smile suddenly turned into a bitter smile. Who said that little girls were easy to fool? There was no light here, and no source of light could be seen, but it was very clear here, but everything was dyed with dark colors. Sound seemed to be able to spread here, but there was no air here, showing a state of complete vacuum. But what was more amazing was that in this vacuum environment, the human body didn't even feel pressure, and there was no difficulty in breathing. It should be said that one didn't even need to breathe here to survive quite well, because the concept of time didn't exist here. The crevice of the dimension, where time stopped forever. After falling from the abyss entrance of the mirror image world, Luochio let his body fall freely. Although time didn't exist here, his personal feelings were still there. At this moment, the number that Luochio silently counted in his heart had reached 203. He finally stopped falling, and now his feet were standing on a piece of wasteland floating in this seemingly rootless dark space. If the resistance of the mirror image world to Luochio's direct contact with the club was like adding a sponge in the transmission of radio waves, then in this dimensional crevice, this resistance was like adding two sponges. In fact, the signal was almost full, so there was nothing to worry about. It should be here. Luochio looked at the position above his head. He fell vertically and landed here, so the person who fell from the steel platform should also be at this position. Of course, if the existence of this dimensional crevice was constantly changing, then the situation might have changed. Luochio tried to check the surrounding environment, then suddenly looked in one direction. Is it here? He was about to look in the direction he was looking, but at this moment, behind Luochio, a huge figure suddenly appeared. There was no light here, only visible things, so there was no shadow. Otherwise, Luochio would be covered by the huge shadow of this figure. Luochio sensed something and turned around. At the same time, a huge roar sounded. In front of him was a monster dozens of times larger than the extinct dinosaurs. Its appearance was like the Western bone dragon in fantasy novels, but its body, especially the exposed bones, had dark brown muscle tissue. In the head like a triceratops, the huge bloody mouth had opened, and the sound came from there. Not only that, but there were also countless similar creatures behind this huge monster. It was just that they were much smaller than this huge monster. However, they were densely packed, as if they were innumerable, but they were far more terrifying than this huge monster. The huge number seemed to have overwhelmed the quality. You are the creatures in the dimensional crevice that Araya mentioned. Void Original Devil? Luochio looked up and sized them up. The structure of these creatures was very strange, which gave him an indescribable feeling. It was Luochio's first time entering the dimensional crevice, so he didn't know anything about it. But the moment he stepped into the dimensional crevice, he felt as if he had entered the third floor of the club, the room where the altar was. It was similar, yet different, which gave him a very subtle feeling. But now wasn't the time to think about it, because this huge monster in front of him, as well as those countless small creatures behind it, their target was probably Luaccio himself. "Be quiet. I'm just here to find a few people," Luaccio said indifferently. But this huge monster in front of him suddenly roared. Its bloody mouth suddenly stretched down. As long as it bit down, Luaccio's body would be directly bitten into two. I said be quiet. It was as if someone had pressed the pause button on the video. The gigantic monster still had its mouth open. However, it suddenly stopped. This situation lasted for about 10 seconds. Time didn't seem to flow here, and to estimate the time, one could only rely on one's senses. It retracted its neck bit by bit, and then retreated step by step. Not long after, this huge monster was already far away from Luaccio. Because of its huge ears and body, every step it took would cover a very long distance. After this huge monster was a certain distance away, it directly lay on the ground, and then fell into a deep sleep. And at this time, this huge monster's body began to change. It seemed that its whole body had turned into a rock, and those small creatures that stayed in the air flew down one by one into the rock mountain that this huge monster had turned into. They attached themselves to this huge rock mountain and also turned into various small rocks of different shapes. At this time, looking from afar, it would only be seen as an inconspicuous rock mountain, and no one would know that it was actually a terrifying and huge monster. "I'm just here to find a few people, and I'll leave once I find them." At this time, Luaccio looked at this huge rock mountain in the distance and said indifferently, "When I leave, I'll probably leave from this position, so please be quiet for a while." But the rock mountain seemed to have really turned into a rock and no longer made any sound. "Then, I won't disturb you." Luaccio turned around, and with a little force, he let his body directly jump away from this floating wasteland. There's almost no gravity here, and Luaccio disappeared from this wasteland just like that. Not long after, because time did not flow here, and one could only rely on one's senses, probably not long after, two more figures slowly fell from above into this huge floating wasteland. One was a man, and the other was a woman. The man was about 30 years old. His skin was dark, and his body was strong, giving people a huge pressure. The woman, on the other hand, was exuding a delicate aura. Her every frown and smile seemed to be able to steal people's souls. "It should be here. The fluctuation just now." The woman looked around at this time. Judging from this fluctuation, it should be at least a complete body of the progenitor of void. The man nodded at this time, and, at the same time, looked around. This area is considered a wasteland in the crevice. How could there be a complete body of the progenitor of void? Who knows? The woman stretched at this time. Not only the delicate aura, but also the laziness that she exuded at this moment could stimulate male instincts to the maximum. Even the man, who was her companion, slightly moved his eyes at this moment. At this time, the woman gently covered her mouth, and there seemed to be a spring in her eyes. "Oh, I didn't expect that King Solomon, who is praised by the world, would be shy." The man named Solomon frowned slightly at this time, slightly dissatisfied. But his eyes soon fell on a huge rock mountain that was about to float in this wasteland, and Solomon quickly said, "Dodgy, if you want to joke, leave it for next time. The target has been found." With that, Solomon directly jumped out and landed directly in front of this huge rock mountain. The woman smiled slightly, looked at the man's back, and yawned lazily again. "What an unromantic man. It really makes me miss the past." "Joe." She immediately shook her head, knowing that what she thought in her heart was unrealistic. Even if time stopped in this place, it couldn't be reversed. Then, she lightly jumped out and quickly came to Solomon's side. But at this time, Solomon was standing in front of this huge rock mountain, motionless, and no one knew what he was thinking. Seems like a guy who is very good at hiding. The woman, Dodgy, looked up at this time and looked at the end of this rock mountain. Could it be that it often disguises itself as a mountain and then hunts? If that's the case, Solomon? She frowned, looked at her companion beside her, and saw that he was also frowning and staring at this rock mountain. "Solomon, what happened?" "It's afraid." At this time, Solomon put his hand on a rock at the bottom of the mountain. and then turned to look at Dodgy. Without a doubt, it's trembling, as if it's afraid of something. Finally, the extremely delicate woman opened her small mouth in shock. She knew that creatures like the Void original demons had no emotions and were creatures that only acted on instinct. Then, what could it be that could make the primordial ancestor of the Void, a high-level being among the primordial demons of the Void, afraid and even tremble? What's even more unbelievable is, Solomon said solemnly, "I'm already touching it, but it's not reacting at all. Dodgy, have you ever seen such a well-behaved progenitor of the Void?" Chapter 985. At this moment, Dodgy also pressed her palm against this huge stone mountain, feeling the trembling that Solomon said. She was silent for a while, although the trembling from her palm was very light for the fearless primordial Void demons. Fear and terror were probably inconceivable things. If they really found something or even someone that could make a creature like the primordial Void demon afraid, it would be one of the most important discoveries they had made since they had been stationed in this crack for so long. Feeling fear meant being scared. What can make one feel scared? Probably only the existence of a natural enemy. But is there really something that can make a primordial Void demon afraid? Dodgy was skeptical. She shook her head and said, "Ever since I came here, I've never seen one." "There is," Solomon said slowly. "I once talked with one of the lords in the throne room and heard her mention a creature called the primordial Void demon." "Dodgy, what is the limit of the primordial Void demon that you know?" "That should be not long after I came here." Dodgy recalled, "The first time I participated in a crusade against the primordial Void demons, there were 7 ultimate Void demon gods. That battle was quite tragic. 4 of our companions had fallen. But later on, I heard that there are even more terrifying primordial Void demons above the ultimate Void demon gods, but I've never seen one." Solomon nodded. "That is a creature called the Void Shura. Actually, the crusade against the Void demon gods you participated in was only the aftermath of the great battle. About 100 years before you came, we were fighting a truly terrifying Void Shura. The ones you attacked later were the remnants of this Void Azura subordinates." Dodgy opened her mouth slightly. "The mature primordial devil of Void, the complete form of the primordial ancestor of Void, and then the ultimate form of the Void demon god. The Void demon god is already at the level of us transcendents, so wouldn't the Void Shura be no?" Solomon shook his head. "The power of the Void Shura wouldn't surpass that of the Void demon gods by much. In terms of power, the two of them should be on the same level. The difference between the two is that the Void Azura already possesses intelligence and seems to have an innate ability to control the Void demon god. Generals and commanders." Dodgy nodded and said, "So, the thing that this Void progenitor is afraid of is the Void Shura?" "Probably." Solomon nodded. "After all, the Void Azura is the limit of what I have seen." But what? "One of the thrones, Sir Red Cloud, said so." Solomon said seriously, "Even the Void Azura might not be the limit of this kind of creature. If there was such a limit, then he could be called a Void God. If there really is a virtual God in the crevice of the dimension, there won't be any space for us to survive." Dodgy couldn't help but smile bitterly. "Why do I feel that even if we transcend the main world, it's still so dangerous? What we can see might not be the limit of what we know. As a transcendent being, could it be that you still don't understand this?" Solomon said calmly, "Because of this, we are explorers step by step. With the help of the Ark's ability, we continue to travel in this dimensional clip, hoping to reach the original world." This seemed to be a rather heavy topic. Dodgy suddenly chuckled. "Maybe there really is a Void Shura passing by, and that's why it's so scared. But if we really encounter a Void Shura, I'm afraid it's not something we can handle. So, why are we still waiting here? Don't forget our mission this time. Let's hurry up and capture this primordial Void progenitor." "Yes, you're right." Solomon nodded. Dodgy chuckled. "In order to save Lord Noah, the thrones have prepared a big gift for heaven. I wonder if those pure petitioners and puppet-like battle angels will show some interesting expressions when a large number of primordial Void demons appear in heaven." Solomon didn't say anything. Before this woman became a transcendent, she seemed to be a demon concubine who liked to look for fun. But this was indeed an order from the thrones, and Solomon didn't intend to disobey. Therefore, he took a deep breath and suddenly punched the huge stone mountain. Many floating boulders floated around him. Some were the size of a football field, and some were only about 2 to 3 meters in diameter. These tiny boulders seemed to have been split from a huge wasteland below. They were like stars surrounding this huge wasteland. And this wasteland was also the place where Luaccio had landed. On the wasteland, there were many potholes which seemed to be caused by something. It seemed that there had been an inhuman battle on this wasteland. Luaccio found half of the primordial void demon's body on the ground. Perhaps because there was no concept of time and love, this half of the primordial void demon's body hadn't rotted. At this moment, a miserable cry suddenly came from behind a tall stalagmite not far away. Luaccio glanced at it and quickly walked over. When he bypassed this stalagmite, Luaccio saw Joan, or one of Joan's. It was the sweater Joan. At this moment, the sweater Joan had fallen to the ground, her face twisted in pain. Her body, her entire lower body, had disappeared. To be exact, the lower half of her body was being swallowed by a huge mouth at this moment. This was a huge creature like a sandworm, and its aura was the same as the primordial void demon Luaccio had encountered when he first arrived. The primordial void demon should have all kinds of forms. This giant worm's mouth was round, and a large number of densely packed and sharp teeth were exposed. As the teeth moved, it kept swallowing the sweater Joan's body into its mouth. Save me. The sweater Joan had experienced a lot of fear at this moment. She stretched out her hand towards Luaccio. Luaccio glanced at her. Aurea had said that if one fell into the dimensional crevice, they would probably end up as food for the primordial void demon. It seemed that he was right. Save me. Many times. Luaccio looked at the sweater Joan's despairing eyes and pained expression. Life and soul are both priceless. But if you insist, it seems that the soul is much more important. Life and soul should be unequal. Then, the sweater Joan's gaze gradually faded. Then, you who have lost your life, what can you use to get your soul back? Luaccio said indifferently. And you who have also lost your soul, what can you use to exchange for your life? The sweater Joan's gaze finally faded, and she completely gave up, struggling. And at this moment, her body was eaten by the primordial void demon behind her. Her lips moved slightly, as if she was saying something, as if she was saying why. Not because of anything. Luaccio looked at her remaining head and sighed. Time and space should be relative. In this infinite time and space that has been derived, if there are as many unlucky you as there are lucky you, just like the many time and space that you have jumped to, the Joan in those times and spaces are probably all lucky and have a life that people can only dream of. Since you have already obtained happiness once, why do you want to jump again? If you feel that the original time and space is unfair to you or even abandoning you, then from the first time you jumped, it was a chance that fate gave you. The sweater Joan opened her mouth and cried loudly. Tears instantly burst out of her eyes, and her eyes were finally covered by the primordial void demon's mouth. She had been completely swallowed into the primordial void demon's body. In the end, it still can't be changed. Luaccio slowly exhaled and was silent for a moment. At this moment, the primordial void demon that had swallowed the sweater Joan didn't seem to be satisfied. The dense teeth in its huge, open mouth moved continuously with the help of the muscles in its gums. Go to sleep when you're full. Luaccio waved his hand. Actually, your lives are already very happy. Sleep when you are full, and only come out to look for food when you're hungry. Don't think too much. The primordial void demon suddenly extended its body, and when that long body rose into the air, it suddenly shot downwards. Rumble, it didn't attack Luaccio, but crashed headfirst into the wasteland. Not long after, it drilled directly into the ground, leaving behind a large pitch-black crater. Luaccio wasn't surprised that the primordial void demon would retreat, but he suddenly glanced at the edge of the crater. There was a small bit of light that suddenly flashed past. The Eye of Horus ring. That was probably the Sweater Jones ring. Luaccio picked up the Eye of Horus ring. In the end, the Sweater Joan had intended to use the ring's ability to jump. It was a pity that the ring's remaining power was very weak. Not to mention leaving this dimensional crevice, it couldn't jump smoothly even in Luaccio's dimension. Luaccio kept the ring. There were a total of 3 people who fell into the dimensional crevice from the mirror world. Now that the Sweater Joan had been directly devoured by the primordial void demon, only the white-clothed Joan and Paul were left. It was just that there were innumerable unusual passageways within the dimensional crevice, and those passageways seemed to connect to different parts of the dimensional crevice. In other words, there was no such thing as coordinates in the dimensional crevice, with all places or many places in a state of overlapping yet separate from each other. At one moment, one's location might be very close, but the next moment, one might be very far away. But since it was a dimensional crevice, it meant that there were passages leading to many different dimensions, just like how number 003 Araya could open a passage from the mirror world to make Joan and Paul fall. There were probably ways to open passages leading to different dimensions in this dimensional crevice. You don't seem to be from here. Are you new here? Suddenly, a soft voice came from above. Luaccio turned around unhurriedly and looked up. What he saw seemed to be a bright red flower, a delicate and beautiful figure like a red flower, graceful and charming, with a graceful figure, waist-length hair, dressed in red, skin whiter than snow, a sword at his waist, with a sword tassel hanging down naturally. It was a jade pendant with 2 fishes, which could be described as valiant and formidable. But this was a man. There was no doubt that this was a man, because he had an Adam's apple and was dressed in ancient clothing. Well, I came here to look for something. If I find it, it's almost time to go back. Luaccio looked up and replied. The beautiful man showed an interested gaze. He landed lightly from the stalagmite he was standing on and walked towards Luaccio. The man casually hung his hand on the sword at his waist, looking somewhat casual, but at the same time very seductive. Was this really a man? Luaccio couldn't help but take a few more glances. Very few people would take the initiative to come here. The beautiful man revealed a smile. Those who come here are either unable to stay in their original place or are exiled sinners. Which one are you? Luaccio shook his head and thought for a moment before saying, Probably not. Are you such a person? Now, I am. Not in the past. And in the future, he paused, his fingers rubbing his long hair as he looked at the endless grayness. He said softly, The future is hard to say. Although there are countless contemporaries that lead to other spacetimes here, and different spacetimes have different processes. They may or may not be the same, but you have never been able to find anything that can help you in other spacetimes. Do you know why? Luaccio just shook his head. The man's gaze was very special, evoking some unpleasant memories in Luaccio, as well as a certain fellow who had awakened his murderous intent. The gay vampire he encountered in the cellar maze of Tushini's Wine Manor, Hidasil. Because even if there are countless of you in other spacetimes, they are still not you. The man chuckled. Only you are eternal. Luaccio somewhat agreed with the man's words. But was it really appropriate for this person to suddenly appear and say these words? It was unknown if it was because the recent holidays had been too long, but Luaccio's awkwardness seemed to be showing signs of recovery. He suddenly had the urge to get this man away from him as soon as possible. I'm very happy to meet you. The man smiled faintly, like an elegant young master, but also like a stunning beauty, making it difficult to distinguish his gender. This monarch's name is Long Yang. May I ask? Oh, Long Yang Jun. Luaccio nodded. Long Yang Jun? Wasn't this the first famous gay recorded in the history of China? The main body of Long Yang's hobby? Have you heard of me, little brother? Long Yangjun's eyes lit up, and he took a step closer to Luaccio. Probably. Luaccio casually replied, then glanced at the man who called himself Long Yangjun's current position. If he were to take another step forward, he would have to be on full alert. Judging from his previous experience of being attacked by Citasil, he would need to be on full alert. Yin 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 Yin. Chapter 986. You seem to have heard of me, little brother. Long Yangjun's question was very direct, as if he really wanted to know if he was really recognized, probably. I've read about you in the history books. Luoqiu answered after thinking for a while. The main reason was that Long Yangjun didn't intend to go any further, and this distance just happened to be outside Luoqiu's range of vigilance. Long Yangjun nodded and said with melancholy, "The last time I left the crevice, it happened to be the Jingguan era. I wonder what era you're in now, little brother." Jingguan? Luoqiu was slightly startled. "That's right." Long Yangjun nodded, and then asked rather concernedly, "I wonder if you've heard of Li Tai Bai." "Li what?" Luoqiu blinked. Long Yangjun said with nostalgia, "Li Tai Bai, also known as Householder Qing Lian, is one of the most talented people I've ever seen in my life. Multicolored horses, 1,000 gold cloaks, a whimper will be exchanged for good wine, and with you, we'll dispel the worries of the ages, the worries of the ages." He seemed to be chanting, and his eyes gradually became gentle. Toasting with Brother Tai Bai under the moonlight and getting drunk was really a great joy in life. At that time, the moonlight was so beautiful. There really wasn't anything wrong with the moonlight. What's the relationship between you two? Don't put on such a shy face. Hey, I keep feeling that if I continue to ask, all the modern language textbooks for elementary, middle, and high school will be torn up. Sorry, I've only read about it in the history books, Luoqiu said indifferently. My era was more than 1,000 years away from the Jingguan era. Long Yangjun sighed slowly. Suddenly, tears welled up in his eyes, revealing a kind of melancholy and lingering aura, as if there were thousands of knots in his heart. This is a man. However, Long Yangjun's melancholy soon disappeared, and a bright smile returned. I've made a fool of myself in the past, little brother, but it's almost time. Let's take a look at the situation of this primordial void demon. Primordial void demon? Startled, Luoqiu subconsciously turned back to look at the deep pit left by the strange worm after it burrowed into the wasteland. It? That's right. Long Yangjun nodded, and then said seriously, "Primordial void demon is a creature unique to this place. But little brother, do you know how it was formed?" "I'd like to hear the details," Lord Long Yang said. "They're the manifestation of the obsessions of all living beings after they die. After becoming a primordial void demon, they no longer have their original thoughts and feelings. Although they had transformed into another type of individual, their obsessions when they were alive still hadn't dissipated. It was as if a hole had appeared in his heart. They desperately needed to devour something to fill the hole. However, this hole didn't originally belong to the primordial void demon, but its body when it was alive. Therefore, this hole exists, but also doesn't exist. Therefore, no matter how much the primordial void demon devours, it can't fill this hole. They can only repeat their instincts and carry out their activities." After Long Yangjun finished speaking, a slight vibration suddenly came from the deep pit in front of them, as if something was surging out from below. It had a thick and long body, just like the huge strange worm Luoqiu had seen not long ago. However, this thing's body was covered with fine scales. It didn't look like a worm anymore. It looked like a snake. However, what was even stranger was that the head of this huge snake had turned into Xiao An's appearance. Her body was almost seamlessly connected with the original primordial void demon. Or rather, the lower half of Xiao An's body had completely turned into a huge and thick tongue. At the same time, her arms and body were also covered with fine scales. What filthy true soul! Long Yangjun looked up at this moment. It actually became the dominant one. "Little brother, you said you were looking for something. Are you looking for this person?" Luoqiu looked at Xiao An's new form after the fusion with the primordial void demon and suddenly asked, "Is it possible for the devoured true soul to take over the original primordial void demon?" Long Yangjun nodded. "Yes, but it's rare. After all, the formation of the primordial void demon doesn't happen overnight. It's not easy for a newcomer to take over the original one. Well, judging from a fluctuation of its aura, this new primordial void demon is about to transform into a mature primordial ancestor of the void. It's just been fused, and it's already grown to such an extent. It seems that its growth potential is very good. After turning into the primordial void demon, Xiao An's eyes had turned into the eyes of a snake. The fingers on her hands turned into sharp, short blades, and under her lips, sharp and long fangs were exposed. "Little brother, can you give this primordial void demon to me?" Long Yangjun suddenly asked. Luochio cast a puzzled look at him. Long Yangjun, however, slowly pulled out the sword at his waist and pointed it at the primordial void demon in front of him. He smiled and said, "It's just a small mission. Each of us needs to bring back some primordial void demons and primordial ancestors of the void. This is only a mutant, but it's comparable to many ordinary primordial void demons. It can really save us a lot of trouble." "Oh." Long Yangjun chuckled again at this moment. He turned back and said coquettishly, "Little brother, you're new here, so it's not surprising that you don't know many things. After this, you can come to my place, and I'll clear up your doubts. And I'd like to have a long talk with you, little brother, so that we can get to know the local customs of this world. Let's deal with it first." Luochio looked at the primordial void demon ambiguously. Long Yangjun smiled at Luochio again and leaped out. His crimson robe was like a blooming red flower, and the charm of his sword blossomed at the same time. It was said that Long Yangjun of the Wei Kingdom was a talented swordsman who possessed extraordinary swordsmanship. Well, Luochio didn't know any swordsmanship, but he still took a few more glances. At this moment, Lord Longyang had leaped onto a huge stalagmite, standing alone with his sword in hand. Facing this primordial void devil, which was dozens of times larger than him, he was completely fearless. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of sword seals exploded on the body of the primordial void demon with the head of a human and the body of a snake. The primordial void demon let out a shrill cry. Luochio could no longer find Wei Xiao's face on the primordial void demon's face. He just watched quietly as the primordial void demon was not completely killed by Long Yangjuan's swordsmanship. It seemed that Long Yangjuan's words about capturing it alive were true. The crevice between dimensions should be the main camp of those transcendents. Long Yangjun was probably one of them. Although he was indeed curious as to why those transcendents captured the primordial void demon, Luochio didn't intend to let Song Haoran and Song Ying wait too long in the mirror image world. He had a feeling that Song Haoran would stir up some trouble given his temperament. Rumble. When the gigantic primordial devil with a human head and a snake body finally fell to the ground powerlessly and kept howling, Lord Longyang finally put his sword back into its sheath. He flipped his drooping hair and chuckled. Then he opened his 5 fingers, and a black hole instantly sucked the primordial void demon into it. Long Yangjun smiled with satisfaction and jumped down from the stalagmite. "Little brother, sorry to keep you waiting. Where is he?" When he landed, there was no trace of Luochio. Lord Longyang looked around in astonishment, only to find that there was no trace of him at all. He didn't even notice when this little brother had left. Looks like this little brother is really outstanding in his own way. Long Yangjun lowered his head and smiled, muttering to himself, "I'm really looking forward to our next encounter. I haven't met such an attractive man for a long time." As he spoke, Lord of Longyang suddenly slapped his own forehead with a regretful look on his face. I actually forgot to ask for his name." After leaving quietly, Luochio quickly moved to another huge floating wasteland. He used some tricks when he left, so Long Yangjun probably couldn't find him. Even so, Luochio still didn't feel good. If the body constitution that always attracted accidents was activated after he became the club owner, then what the hell was the body constitution of men who were interested in men recently? However, Luochio soon found Joan in White, who had fallen from the mirror image world on this new wasteland. She was much luckier than Joan in that she didn't meet the primordial void demon after she fell. When Luochio found her, Joan in White was wandering alone on this wasteland. She didn't give up looking for Paul. She might not even know that Paul had been thrown into the dimensional crack in the end. It was likely that this kind of action had already exceeded the level of normal thinking that she could achieve. Luochio followed behind Joan in White, watching her wander for a long distance. In the end, Xiaoan suddenly stopped walking and found a place to sit down. She buried her face between her knees and hugged her legs tightly. Everything around her was dark, without day or night. She was alone. Later, she seemed to hear some footsteps. She slowly raised her head and shouted anxiously, "Paul, it's you." What surprised Xiao and was that the person she met was the mysterious young man who had seen through her true identity. "Why are you also? I don't think I woke you up." Luochio came to Joan in white, looking down at her. There was some dust on her face, which should have been from this wasteland. The muddy dust and tears had smeared her beautiful face like melted makeup. Joan in white was indeed a delicate beauty, no matter which space and time. "You? Were you also thrown down?" Luochio looked at Joan in white in surprise. If his memory wasn't messed up, she should have heard the conversation between him and Araya. If she understood the meaning of his conversation with Araya, she should know that Araya would never throw Luochio down. Seeing Luochio's expression, Joan in white had to apologize. "I'm sorry, I didn't pay attention to you at that time. I saw that Paul was too scared, so I thought about how to calm him down." In other words, she didn't listen or care at all. In her world, under such a shocking change, she only paid attention to Paul. Luochio slowly squatted down, took out a white handkerchief, and wiped the dirt on Joan's face. "Now, do you have an answer?" Joan in white was stupefied. She didn't know how long she had been wandering in this wasteland, but she felt physically and mentally exhausted, so she forced herself to sit down and take a rest. Luochio began to wipe the dirt on the other side of her face. Joan in white moved her lips in vain. "It doesn't matter," Luochio said softly. "It's quiet here, and the quietness makes people calm down. You don't have to know the answer." Then Paul. She vaguely expected something. "I didn't see him when I came down," Luochio said. The white-clothed Xiao and heaved a sigh of relief before curling up once again. Although the dirt on her face had been wiped clean, she still looked tired. She said faintly, "I don't know how Paul is now. Will she treat him well?" "Do you think she won't treat him well?" Luochio suddenly asked. Joan in white shook her head. "I don't know, but if it's me..." She shook her head again, and then looked at Luochio with a wry smile. "In fact, I have seen many Pauls." Luochio listened attentively. Joan in white whispered that some of them are just born, and their eyes haven't opened yet. Some of them have already learned how to walk and jump around. She subconsciously grabbed Luochio's arm, and her eyes sparkled with pride. "They are all excellent, some like painting, some like singing." She smiled. "Some of them are as old as Paul. They can laugh, walk, and are very naughty, and they will smile at me. When they smile at me, they even..." Joan in white seemed to realize that these were far away, and she soon became silent. She still shook her head. "But they're not my Paul. I know, they're not my Paul. They all have their own mothers." Luochio sat down. "You know what? When you asked me, am I really the child's mother, I was really scared." Joan in white put her chin on her knees and looked ahead. "I was scared. I was scared that I couldn't find him again." "So you appeared in front of Paul at the airport?" Luochio looked at Joan. "Because his real mother is not here." "I didn't mean it." She looked at Luochio, hesitating. I really don't intend to steal other people's children, because I know the pain of losing a child. I just want to see him again. I always think if on the day of the accident, Paul also made the same leap as me. I have been telling myself this, and I can only tell myself this." She was already sad and even sobbing. I can find him. I will find him. He's been waiting for me. Please give me an answer, okay?" Luochio suddenly asked softly. In a trance, Joan in white moved her lips. If I can, I would rather jump in different time and space until the day I can find him. I think maybe I will go crazy. Am I stupid?" Luochio looked at her, turned the handkerchief to a clean place, and then gently touched the tears on her face. "You have jumped in many different time and space and seen many children. There is no doubt that if you can be like her and be willing to replace one of so many time and space, maybe you are already happy, right?" Xiao's lips were slightly puckered and trembling. Luochio's voice became softer. "But you have never done this, right? Even if the child is more important than your life to you, you are not willing to take away someone else's child." Luochio raised his hand, and there was a glimmer of light in his palm, and then it gradually expanded. In the white and holy light, there was the initial form of life. Although all the facial features were not clearly seen, and the forelimbs were not clearly grown, there is no doubt that this is a complete life. Joan in white reached out her trembling hand, wanting to touch this small and independent life, but she retreated before she touched it. All of a sudden, she heard the heartbeat of the little creature, which seemed to overlap with her own heartbeat. Her tears were still flowing, but she was also stunned at the same time. He is also Paul, but he has never really seen the world. He is only considered to have been here. Luaccio looked at Joan at this time. Time and space are relative. There are many times when you are favored by the lucky lock in time and space. There will be many times when you are entangled by misfortune. Maybe you belong to the unfortunate side, but even so, you don't want to change anything by taking away the life of another lucky Joan. For such a you, even if fate makes you suffer all this, but at least, Luaccio smiled and said, at least with me, there is still a part of your luck. So, are you willing to accept it? Why? She looked at the mysterious young man in a daze. Probably because I have more freedom now. With that, Luaccio gently pressed the light ball containing the initial life in his palm on Joan in White's abdomen. It merged into Joan in White's body little by little. Joan held her abdomen tightly and was in a daze. Go. Luaccio waved his hand at this time. Readjust the scale of luck and misfortune. The lucky side has been destroyed too much, so let the unlucky side make up for it. The world will not do anything to you. The gray color in the dimensional crevice faded from Joan in White's eyes at this moment. As if it was a projection, the desolate land instantly turned green. When she came back to her senses, she was already in a peaceful park. She was sitting on a bench in the park, but she suddenly saw a girl with blue hair and blue eyes in front of her. Araya. This was a world where Joan once existed, but Joan was gone. It belonged to the world of the lucky Joan in many dimensions. Intelligent manager of all things Araya, serial number 041, at your service. A dream? She thought. Chapter 987. When Solomon and Daji found Lord Long Yong, he was sitting on the edge of a desolate land. His eyes were closed, and he was playing a musical instrument called shang. Daji was no stranger to shang. She used to live in the palace and had her own team of musicians. She also had a teacher. However, Solomon was curious and couldn't help but look at this strange musical instrument. Although they all lived in the gap between dimensions, the detached ones didn't have a close relationship with each other. If there was no rush between the sovereign stage, they would have been separated. Of course, some of the detached ones had different levels of personal friendship. Solomon knew about Long Yangjuan's existence, but they rarely talked to each other. When they met, they just greeted each other. However, Daji and Long Yangjun had a good relationship in private. Long Yangjun, I've been looking for you many times, hoping that you can play a song for me. Daji smiled, but it's hard to get. What happened today that gave you such a refined mood? Long Yangjun put down the sheng, got up, nodded at Daji, and smiled. I'm just expressing my feelings. If you like it, I'll definitely come and play it for you. Daji smiled sweetly. This woman seemed to have a special charm given by God. Even the detached ones couldn't resist it. Most of the time, Solomon could only try his best not to look at Daji's eyes. It wasn't that his willpower wasn't strong enough, but it was because Daji's power came from this pair of eyes that seemed to be able to steal souls. He wasn't the only one. Many detached ones couldn't resist Daji's beauty, especially men. Probably only people like Long Yangjun didn't have such problems. But now wasn't the time to talk. Solomon said seriously, Long Yangjun, I've teamed up with Daji and caught a lot of primordial demons. Not long ago, we met a complete primordial ancestor of the void. We've done more than what the sovereign stage asked us to do. What about you? I didn't expect to meet you here. Perhaps he could take this opportunity to communicate more with Long Yangjun. Although he was already a transcendent being, he was still a great emperor of the human world. Roping in factions was something he was born with. My luck wasn't that good, I only caught one. However, This essence devil is rather interesting. At this moment, Long Yang-jun looked at Solomon and gave him a simple explanation of how he had captured the Void original demon with a human head and snake body. At this moment, he looked at Solomon, and his eyes lit up slightly. He chuckled and said, "A very good one. In the future, it might be able to go very far as the Void original devil. It's really a pity to use it to complete the plan of the sovereigns this time." "Haha, that's easy." At this time, Solomon said straightforwardly, "I have extra here. Long Yang-jun, if you don't mind, I'll give it to you." "Thank you so much." Long Yang-jun didn't stand on ceremony. He just looked at this once valiant emperor of a foreign country, and his eyes burned with passion. Daji's gaze swept back and forth between the two. Then, she narrowed her eyes, as if waiting for something interesting to happen. Unexpectedly, Long Yang-jun suddenly asked at this moment, "By the way, are there any new members joining recently?" Solomon was startled and said subconsciously, "I haven't heard of that. However, some of our companions who were in charge of being guides found some good newcomers a while ago. Among them, the one who was most appreciated by the sovereigns is called Urex. However, he seems to be receiving guidance from Lord Kishadi Nagisa between the sovereigns and hasn't appeared yet. The rest of the newcomers are still in the assessment stage. So, who is the newcomer that Long Yang-jun is referring to?" "Urex?" Long Yang-jun opened his mouth slightly in surprise. To be able to be appreciated by that lord, it seems like he has great potential. Well, I haven't asked for the name of the one I met. However, I saw that he was very unfamiliar with this dimensional crack. I'm afraid he's not a newcomer who was selected this time." "Oh," Daji said with interest. If he didn't go through the guide, then there are only 2 or 3 possibilities for him to come here. Either his own strength has reached the limit, and he sensed that he can't continue to stay in the main world, or he accidentally entered some secret crack and entered here by mistake. Long Yang-jun recalled, "This little brother is very strange. According to him, he came here to look for something. I'm afraid he didn't enter by mistake." In other words, he relied on his own ability? Solomon's eyes suddenly lit up. The sovereigns have always valued the juniors who transcended based on their own abilities. It seems that this news needs to be passed to the sovereigns. Long Yang-jun, what does this person look like? For the sovereigns, the development of the brain could no longer be described with common sense. Retentive memory was probably just an instinct. "This is simple." Long Yang-jun smiled. "Perhaps there are many companions who know him. Let me draw a picture." As he spoke, Long Yang-jun gently pulled out the sword in his hand and planned to draw with the sword. Long Yang-jun closed his eyes and stood still with the sword in his hand. However, after a while, Long Yang-jun didn't move at all. Daji had seen Long Yang-jun's drawing before. Without a doubt, he could make it lifelike. However, at this moment, she also noticed that something was wrong with Long Yang-jun. "Long Yang-jun, are you in trouble?" Daji asked softly. Long Yang-jun opened his eyes and looked at his 2 companions with a strange expression. He frowned and said, "I can't remember this little brother's appearance." "What?" Solomon asked in surprise. Daji was also surprised. "I can remember what he said, but his appearance has become very blurry in my memory." Long Yang-jun took a deep breath and said, "Later, I tried to explore my memory and found that it became more and more blurry." "Oh," Solomon raised his eyebrows. "Could it be that this newcomer has the ability to affect or even change other people's memories? If that's true, it's a very troublesome ability. If that's the case, then hurry up and reach the throne level," Daji suggested at this time. Long Yang-jun nodded. "Okay." When Luochio returned to the bottom of the passage from a mirror image world to the crack of the dimension, the floating wasteland where he originally landed had disappeared. There was nothing around him. Luochio didn't find Paul. His intuition told him that if he continued to search in the crack of the dimension, he wouldn't find Paul. However, he didn't die, so there was only one possibility left. His body slowly rose up from the passage. As he gradually left the crack of the dimension, the passage to the mirror image world was quickly closing. When Luochio completely left the abyss passage, the surroundings had returned to its original appearance. The Abyss Passage also returned to its original appearance of the airport hall in the mirror image world. There was not a speck of dust under his feet, and the floor tiles could almost reflect his face. Luochio, who had just arrived, heard Song Ying's nervous and anxious cry. Luochio followed the sound and found Song Ying standing there in fear. Song Howard was also here, but at this time, Song Howard was motionless, or at this time, Song Howard had directly turned into a stone statue. He was completely petrified. What happened? Luochio came in front of Song Ying and looked at Araya at the same time. Song Ying opened her mouth, but hesitated to speak. However, Araya said without any pressure, "Answer. The individual is judged to be dangerous. It is recommended that the behavior of the individual be restrained." Luochio looked at Song Ying, and Song Ying had no choice but to say, "You know Song Howard's character. He is actually not a bad person. He is just a little curious." And then, he probably asked some questions. She did not dare to say that Song Howard actually intended to secretly record the conversation. However, after Luochio glanced at the fragments of the mobile phone on the ground, he roughly guessed that Song Howard was only temporarily petrified, and his life was not in danger. A space-time was like a precise clock, and every individual was an indispensable part of this clock. Then, as the sub-manager of this space-time, Araya would not casually destroy any part of this clock. Has the disorder of this space-time been restored? Luochio asked Araya. Answer. The factor of disorder has been restored. Luochio nodded and suddenly said, "Do what you were supposed to do. If there is nothing special, I will not voluntarily enter the mirror world of this space-time." This time, Araya did not respond. He just maintained a silent appearance. Then, Luochio suddenly waved at Song Ying and Song Howard, and the two left the mirror world in an instant. Luochio glanced at the place where Han Bingjiang's body was supposed to be. He found that Han Bingjiang's body was gone. Presumably, it had been disposed. As for Qiaoan, who Araya created again, she had already opened her eyes. However, this Qiaoan's eyes were lifeless, without the slightest bit of spirit, like a puppet. However, ordinary people would not be able to tell when she was officially activated. This was because once she was activated, it meant that she was already an ordinary person in this space-time. Seems like you're quite used to this kind of operation, Luochio said with a smile. Araya said, "Answer. This is the 19,235 incident. There are sufficient cases in the database for reference. 19235. Luochio was slightly surprised. For a world with a huge population base, this number was just a drop in the ocean. However, the number that was close to 20,000 was actually not a small number. Luochio pondered slightly. In fact, there was not much that he wanted to know from Araya. But there was one thing. You, other than me, have you seen other Origin Authority? Luochio looked into Araya's eyes. The light in the blue pupils began to flicker. Luochio noticed that whenever Araya was thinking or analyzing, there would be such a light in his eyes. He waited. Answer no. No. Luochio was startled. After a moment of silence, he suddenly asked, if the Origin Authority requested you to delete a part of your memory, would you comply? Answer. The Origin Authority is above the sub-administrator. Luochio nodded and did not say anything else. Then, he slowly retreated before Araya's eyes. As he retreated, Luochio's figure gradually disappeared from the mirror image world. In the almost dead silence of the mirror image world, only Araya's voice, which still did not fluctuate, rang. Carry out the follow-up of the correction plan. She raised her hand, and the recreated Joan began to move. When Song Howard's senses returned, he found himself in the same airport where he was first pulled into the mirror image world. It was also the place where Han Bingjiang encountered the three different Jonas. Song Ying? Song Howard instinctively looked at Song Ying. Song Ying shook her head. She was a little flustered and worried. Are you all right? You have no idea that you turned into a stone just now. You really scared me. Song Howard frowned, and then suddenly said, Give me the phone. Why are you still thinking about this? Song Ying was about to scold him when she saw Song Howard suddenly pinching his sleeve. The wrist on the sleeve was now dripping with blood. Song Ing opened her mouth in surprise. When did you get this? Song Howard didn't say anything. He just quickly wiped away the blood on the wound. When the blood was wiped away, the meaning of the wound in front of Song Ing became clear. Araya. The wound on the wrist turned out to be this name. Song Howard secretly engraved this word on his body. Quick, take a picture of the wound, while we can still remember. She said that she would erase our memories. Song Ing was a little hesitant at this time. However, she could not resist Song Howard's eager gaze. She could only take out the phone half-heartedly. Unexpectedly, when Song Ing was about to take the picture, another palm suddenly rested on Song Howard's wrist. At the same time, Luacio's voice came. Are you hurt? Let me see. Well, it's fine now. When Luacio's palm left, the bleeding wound on Song Howard's wrist had disappeared. The two looked at Luacio in surprise at the same time. However, at this moment, Luacio put his hand between them and snapped his fingers. The two were absent-minded and stood there quietly. Luacio glanced at Song Howard, whispering, In the future, you will meet her one day. In the explosion at the airport, the suspect was named Han Bingjiang. However, he took the opportunity to escape during the trial. In the process of Han Bingjiang's escape, he even stabbed a foreign youth. There were many witnesses at the scene that could prove it. As for Han Bingjiang himself, he accidentally fell into an escalator somewhere in the airport in a hurry to escape. As his head was severely injured, there was a lot of bleeding. The rescue was ineffective, and he died immediately. The reason why the suspect wanted to make the bomb also became a mystery because of the suspect's death. Song Howard, Song Ing, and Luacio were on their way back to the hotel in the airport. Song Howard had his hands behind his neck, walking with a relaxed expression. Suddenly, he said, In the end, we still don't know who the child's parents are? Song Ing said, Didn't the people at the security office say that the child's parents have already taken the child away? Really, it was already over, but you insisted that since we were out, you were hungry and wanted to find something to eat. Now, we've bumped into the scene where Han Bingjiang slipped and almost got the police to question you. What if our identities were exposed? You can't blame me for this. Song Howard put his hand on Luacio's shoulder. I came out to accompany you to find him. Song Howard. Oh, I almost forgot. I booked a suite service in my room. I'll go back first. Don't go. Bastard. They chased after each other. Luacio looked at the two people who were playing and walking away. He suddenly stretched and then opened the door of his room in the hotel. When he returned to the room, there was a picture book on the snow-white bedsheet. Luacio poured a glass of water and sat by the window with the picture book. He began to turn the picture book. On the latest page, there was a sun drawn with an orange crayon. Below it was a grassland with flowers almost as tall as the house. The mother and son were holding hands. Luacio picked up the teacup and drank a mouthful of water. Then he turned the picture book to the front. There was a page like this. A woman fell in a pool of blood, and a woman stood beside the body with a knife. What are parents to children? Luacio was silent for a moment and finally closed the picture book. Then he opened the curtain and saw the airport in the early morning. Probably some kind of inheritance. In a distant time and space, a child suddenly appeared in the room. This child was almost the same as the child who was sleeping in the room. This was really a surprising thing. Maybe they were just twins, or so he thought. However, when the sleeping child suddenly woke up, he was very surprised to see a child who looked like him standing by his bed. Who are you? The child who had just woken up asked curiously. Hey, is your mother good to you? The child standing by the window suddenly asked. Although it was very strange, the child who had just woken up was very ignorant. He nodded subconsciously and smiled happily. She's the best to me. Oh, that's good. The child standing by the bed nodded. But all of a sudden, the child by the bed grabbed a pencil from the table by the window and stuck it into the neck of the child by the window without saying a word. That's my mother. Soon, the child on the bed didn't move. He just opened his eyes wide, and a pencil was inserted into his neck. Some blood splattered on the body and face of the child by the bed. At this time, a voice suddenly came from downstairs, a very gentle voice. Paul, are you awake? If you wake up, quickly come down to brush your teeth and eat breakfast, okay? The school bus is coming. So the child by the bed reached out and wiped the blood on his face, and the blood gradually disappeared from his body. Then he showed a smile as bright as the sun and said happily, "I'm awake, Mom." The child changed his clothes and then opened the door of the room. "Mom, what's breakfast today?" The moment he closed the door made a slight sound of the door axle. Chapter 988. The news that the famous paparazzi Han XX appeared at the airport and caused a terrorist attack of unknown significance was soon spread on the internet. There were different opinions. Some said it was for revenge on society. Some said it was because of the support of evil sex. And some said Han XX just wanted to make a big news at first, but unexpectedly got himself into trouble. But these things were not important for the Song family. Because of the tight schedule, the Song family had to take another flight as soon as they woke up in the morning under the arrangement of Mr. Seven. This time, the Song family's destination was the ancestral grave near Mount Tai, so the final destination of this flight was Jinan. Song Ying, who had just woken up, was too sleepy. After boarding the plane, she wanted to put on an eye mask and fall asleep immediately. However, something happened on the plane, which made Song Ying unable to sleep at all. "Luochio, why are you here?" Inside the cabin, a young woman had a surprised look on her face. She was so surprised that she covered her mouth with her hand. This was a typical Oriental woman who didn't belong to her in appearance. She was even like a lotus, which made people feel comfortable. Mr. Seven said this was the granddaughter of the old lady, and she would also participate in the following trip. In fact, this plane was not a flight, but a private plane under the name of the Zhang family. Oh, what a coincidence! Suddenly, the surroundings seemed to become quiet. After a moment of silence, Luochio squeezed out a sentence that didn't make the situation too quiet. Luochio was indeed surprised. The woman who greeted him was his old acquaintance. When he was in school, she was another student in his class. At first, Luochio just thought that the Zhang family was just a low-key rich family. But later, his opinion gradually changed. Now he knew that the Zhang family, with only 2 women left, was still one of the well-known families in the world. Luochio didn't comment on Zhang Qingrui's ability, but the old lady behind the Zhang family must be a powerful woman. Seeing Luochio on the plane, Zhang Qingrui lost her composure. But Zhang Qingrui was trained by Zhang Lilanfang, so she soon recovered her composure. Suppressing her complicated thoughts, she smiled. "Yeah, what a coincidence. We haven't met for a long time, right?" The so-called smile of a woman was probably the type of woman like Zhang Qingrui. Song Howren found it pleasing to the eye, and he couldn't help but compare it to his niece. At this moment, due to her severe insomnia, Song Ying's eye bags were a little obvious, and her face looked rather haggard. Her hair didn't seem to have been combed properly either. She could see some messy strands of hair. "It's been a while." Luochio nodded. "Let's go in first." There were still people from the Song family waiting behind him, such as the butler, Uncle Wu, and the bodyguards of the Song family. When they sat down in the lounge of the private plane, Song Tianyu chuckled. "You must be Qingrui, right? Sister Li mentioned you many times in front of me, saying you're like a lotus flower rising out of the water with a pure heart. Seeing you today, it's true, it's true. Seeing you reminds me of Sister Li's beautiful appearance in the capital. It's really nostalgic." "You flatter me, Mr. Song." Zhang Qingrui was modest and polite in front of Father Song's praise. This won the favor of everyone, especially Zhang Qingrui, who was like an orchid in an empty valley when she was quiet, which was very pleasing to the eye. "Hello, I'm Song Ying. Nice to meet you, Miss Zhang." Suddenly, Miss Song Ying greeted her politely. Song Howren glanced at her and couldn't help but be surprised. This girl, when did she finish her makeup? Although Song Ying didn't put much effort into her makeup, it was much better than when she had just woken up without makeup. In fact, what made Song Howren speechless was her makeup was too good. Maybe it was a woman's talent? Zhang Qingrui. Ms. Zhang reached out her hand. The two of them simply bumped their hands and then sat down with a smile. However, the seat was a little narrow, so after they sat down, Song Ying quietly stepped on Song Howren's foot. Helpless, young Master Song could only touch his nose. Looking at Song Ying's kind smile, he stood up and said, By the way, is there anything to drink here? How about some wine? It's morning. It's not good to drink. Zhang Qingrui smiled. If you don't mind, let me make a pot of tea for you. Miss Zhang, do you know something about tea ceremony? Song Tianyu asked with interest. In fact, this was a good opportunity to test the younger generation of the Zhang family. It was usually like this when aristocratic families interacted with each other. If the younger generation could show their elegance in front of the older generation, it would naturally be more reassuring, because the wealth and power in the mortal world were not fixed, but passed on to the next generation. Whether the younger generation of a world was a dragon or a snake also determined the rise and fall of an aristocratic family in the future. Old Man Song knew that he was about to retire. In the future, he would probably pass away after a period of leisure. After all, this was a necessary stage in life. But he was worried about the foundation of the Song family. So on one hand, he hoped that Song Howren and Song Ing could really mature, and on the other hand, he hoped to find his elder brother's descendant. At the same time, he didn't want to see the relationship with Zhang Lilianfang cut off when the Song family was passed on to the younger generation. So it was necessary to test Zhang Qingrui. Perhaps Big Sister Li also had such thoughts, so she deliberately sent her granddaughter here. She also wanted to see with her own eyes whether the younger generation of the Song family had any outstanding aspects. Thinking about it, it was just a blink of an eye. At this moment, Zhang Qingrui said with a smile, although I have studied, it's not very elegant. At best, I'm just amusing myself. Please don't laugh at me. It doesn't matter. Put effort into making tea. Father Song said indifferently. A person with a heart can turn dead water into running water. As for a pot of tea, all you need is running water. Then I'll make a fool of myself. Zhang Qingrui nodded, glancing at Luoqiu intentionally or unintentionally. But at this moment, she found that Luoqiu acted as if he didn't exist here, holding his chin and looking at the blue sky and white clouds outside the window. Zhang Qingrui smiled slightly. In fact, she was very used to Luoqiu's day's behavior. In the past year of school, Luoqiu was always in this state and never took the initiative to say anything to her. Coming to school and leaving after school, the two of them had maintained a nodding acquaintance for more than a year. Zhang Qingrui thought it was inconceivable, but at the same time, she was inexplicably reassured by this male classmate who was obviously in a favorable position. The sun and the moon in his heart probably couldn't shine on her side, right? She recalled that time when she met Luoqiu by chance on the plane. He was accompanied by a woman who made her pale in comparison. He said that she was someone who had been with him for a long time. Father Song was a very shrewd person. He could see people's little movements very clearly. For example, when Song Ing stepped on Song Howren just now, or when Zhang Qingrui glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. So he chuckled and suddenly said, Luoqiu is a lover I found recently. Why, does Miss Zhang know him? Zhang Qingrui opened her mouth slightly. Although she had some guesses about Luoqiu, she was still a little surprised when she heard about his relationship with the Song family. The most important thing was that although she had forgotten what happened on the Mongolian grassland and had no memory of Kai Wenji and Zhang Jiao in the underground palace, she had recorded everything and sent it to her future self. She knew that Luoqiu wasn't an ordinary person, but it was hard for her to get a clear idea of what kind of person he was. He was a strange person in the city and a member of the aristocratic family system. He really knew how to hide. Luoqiu and I are old classmates. So this pleasing Miss Zhang started to brew tea while talking about how she and Luoqiu were in a class with only 2 people. As he listened, Luoqiu realized that time had passed a little too quickly. Although those days were still vivid in his mind, the two of them unconsciously felt a little awkward. Oh, is that so? That's really fate. Father Song's eyes lit up slightly. He was a person who believed in fate. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so respectful to Mr. Blind. At the same time, he was also a person who worshipped Buddha, so he valued fate even more. So Father Song looked at Luoqiu and said, Luoqiu, why don't you introduce this Miss Zhang to us? I want to hear about her. She's a very good person. Luoqiu looked at Zhang Qingrui and suddenly remembered the day when the underground palace collapsed. She stood on a rock at the edge of the huge pit with her arms open to welcome the wind. He smiled and asked, "Are you still in school?" "Yeah." Zhang Qingrui nodded gently. "I told my family that I'll talk about it after I finish school." "Pretty good." Luochio nodded. Zhang Qingrui said, "Not bad. I met a few new classmates recently. They don't know me, so I feel good. By the way, is Miss Rin still working as a reporter? If possible, I can ask her for an exclusive interview soon. She'll probably be very happy." Luochio smiled without thinking. He knew Rin Xiling's character too well. Although this woman liked to interview strange news, she couldn't report to the chief editor. So if she could interview Guyu Zhai, a local antique magazine, Rin Xiling would probably accept it. After all, it could offset her daily misdeeds in the magazine. "That's good." Zhang Qingrui took a piece of paper and a pen and wrote a phone number on it. "I changed my phone number recently. You can give this to Miss Rin. You can contact me at any time. I'll arrange the time." "Thank you." Luochio took it. Seeing the two talking happily, Song Howren suddenly whispered in Song Ying's ear, "This woman is not simple. She's very skillful. You have a rival." After saying this, Song Howren suddenly opened his eyes wide, because his feet were being rubbed back and forth by Song Ying's heels. Song Ying said kindly, "What did you say?" Zhang Qingrui seemed to feel that it was inappropriate for them to talk like this, so she smiled. "We talked for a long time, but I haven't made tea for you. Please wait a moment. Let me get some tea sets." "Take your time, Miss Zhang." Father Song nodded. While waiting, Song Ying moved to Luochio's side and asked quietly, "The girlfriend you mentioned is not her, right? Just a classmate." Luochio shook his head and looked out of the window. "Probably a classmate I can get along with in the past." Song Ying looked at him suspiciously. At this time, the plane vibrated slightly. Zhang Qingrui had to put down the tea sets when she came back with them, saying, "Sorry, I forgot the time. The plane is about to take off. Let's check our seats and fasten our seatbelts." She didn't know whether it was intentional or just a coincidence. In the seat arrangement, Luochio and Zhang Qingrui just happened to sit across from each other. The two looked at each other and smiled. They didn't feel uncomfortable. When the Song family arrived in Shanghai, Mr. Blind, who had separated from the Song family in Xiangjiang, had quietly arrived at Wudong Mountain. This time, Mr. Blind asked Song De and Song San to follow him. Song De and Song San were from Shaolin. In the circle of martial artists, Shaolin and Wudong were old rivals and had a lot of history. Hearing that they could go to Wudong, Song De and Song San, who were real martial artists, were naturally interested and agreed without hesitation. However, Wudong Mountain was quite big, and Mr. Blind didn't take them to the Taoist temple on Wudong Mountain. They heard that it was Mr. Blind's former residence. Since Mr. Blind was from Wudong Mountain, did Wudong Mountain have an immortal fate? While Song De and Song San were guessing and exchanging glances from time to time, Mr. Blind had already brought the two of them to a bamboo forest on the mountain. Outside the bamboo forest, there was a white-haired old man with muddy eyes waiting in the cold wind. He seemed to have been waiting for a long time, because it was obvious that this old man was shivering nonstop from the cold. At this moment, seeing Mr. Blind walking in the cold wind, this shivering old man ran up to him. Before he could say anything, he knelt on the ground and kowtowed. This junior's useless disciple, Huang Qifa, greets ancestor. Song De and Song San looked at each other. They knew that Mr. Blind had a master, and there seemed to be some things that prevented him from returning to his master. However, the two of them didn't know that Mr. Blind had his own inheritance. After all, ancestor and martial granduncle were different. Martial artists could clearly distinguish the difference between the two. "Stand up." Mr. Blind waved his hand and asked Huang Qifa to stand up. Then, he suddenly said, "Have you seen anyone recently?" Huang Qifa was startled and shook his head in confusion. "No." "Ancestor, is there something wrong?" Chapter 989. Song De and Song San were flipping through some books on the bookshelves of this house, hidden in the bamboo forest out of boredom. These were not martial arts secret books, but some Analects of Confucius, Book of Changes, and the like. This was totally different from what they thought at the beginning. The blind man asked us to accompany him this time. Is it really just to accompany him?" Song-sen looked at Song, shook his head blankly. The blind man said at the beginning, "Are you two interested in accompanying me to Wudong Mountain?" Hearing that it was a holy place like Wudong Mountain, the two agreed without hesitation. But in the end, they came here only to see a white-haired grand disciple. I feel like we were tricked by the blind man. Song frowned for a while and squeezed out this sentence. We were tricked. The blind man just wanted to find someone to carry the bags. Song-san patted his forehead. The two showed a vexed expression at the same time. Let's take a walk outside. Song decided, at least we can take it as a sightseeing. Song-sen had to do the same. Anyway, after getting off the plane in Hong Kong, they had re-registered their mobile phones in China so the blind man could find them. Grandmaster, who are the two people you brought? In a quiet room in the house, Master Huang Chifa was standing beside Mr. Blind respectfully. At this moment, Mr. Blind was silently looking at a yellowed ink painting in the room. In the painting, there was an ancient man who looked like an immortal gazing at the Milky Way. They are just two people to carry the bags, don't mind them, Mr. Blind said slowly and turned around. Then he directly sat down on the futon in the quiet room and waved his hand. Huang Chifa tactfully sat down in front of Mr. Blind. He had only seen this grandmaster 4 times in his life, including this time, and each time was not long. However, these 4 times almost spanned Huang Chifa's whole life. He had grown from a young boy to an old man, but the Grandmaster's appearance had not changed. Those people in the city who looked for him all called him Master Huang, Great Deity Huang, but in fact the one in front of him was the real deity. The Grandmaster was the real deity. "Give me your hand," Mr. Blind suddenly said. "I'll feel your bones first." Hearing this, Huang Chifa hurriedly rolled up his sleeves and stretched out his hand. He himself also knew how to feel bones, but it was an unorthodox method that he had figured out by himself. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it didn't work. At this moment, Mr. Blind said again, "Tell me the cause and effect of the incident you mentioned. Also, give me a detailed description of the characteristics of the person you spoke of as all living beings." Huang Chifa's physiognomy, which he had painstakingly practiced for decades, was broken because of that one time. The memory was still fresh in his mind. At this time, he opened his mouth and said, "That day, someone introduced me to a job. Originally, it was just an ordinary job to look at a person's marriage. But I didn't expect that young man's physiognomy to be so strange. It's really unprecedented." Huang Chifa sighed. "At that time, I overestimated myself. Half of it was because I was impatient and broke the rules of the sect. I used the cultivation method passed down by the Grandmaster to open my eyes to take a closer look. But I didn't expect that I would be backfired. It has been almost half a year since I broke the rules of the sect." When did you meet this person?" Mr. Blind suddenly asked. Huang Chifa hurriedly told him the specific date and time. He even took out the birth date and horoscope given by the client. Mr. Blind raised his hand and started calculating something with his fingers. But as he calculated, his brows started to furrow. The speed at which his fingers moved became faster and faster. In the end, Huang Chifa could only see the afterimages of his fingers, and he could not help but be shocked. The so-called pinching fingers to calculate was not as simple as it was described by ordinary people. It included a large number of complicated formulas. Without extraordinary memory and mental calculation ability, it was impossible to learn. If one wasn't talented, even if he practiced hard for a lifetime, he would only be able to scratch the surface and not be considered a beginner. Originally, the amount of calculation was not something that the human brain could achieve at the current stage. However, what made Huang Chifa's heart tighten was that Mr. Blind's fingers suddenly stopped. He thought that the immortal Grandmaster had an answer, but unexpectedly, the Grandmaster was still silent. Huang Chifa secretly glanced at the Grandmaster's expression. He didn't open his eyes. Then, he glanced at the Grandmaster's fingers and found that Mr. Blind's fingers were slightly twitching at this moment. Could it be that the ancestral master's hand had gotten cramps from his calculations? "Give me some water." Mr. Blind pinched between his eyebrows and said indifferently, The rheumatism of these years has come. Let me have a good rest. So it was rheumatism. No wonder. Although it was said that the Grandmaster had a technique to retain his youthful appearance, he was already so old. Huang Chifa thought that he was also an old man. He had to stick the dogskin plaster on his back for at least 8 to 10 days a month. Although the Grandmaster was an immortal, he was still old after all. Please wait a moment. Chifa will go and boil a pot of hot water for you right away. He saw Huang Qinfa scramble up and then hurriedly walk out of the quiet room. After that, Mr. Blind slowly used his other hand to hold his trembling wrist. It's not as simple as all living beings alike, he muttered to himself. Then he stood up and faced the ink painting hanging on the wall again. The Grandmaster who founded the sect is above, Mr. Blind said in a low voice. You once left behind a scripture that said, before the world changes, there must be strange phenomena of the mutants. The descendant of the Song family I met in South America was a mutant. Was the person that Huang Chifa met also a mutant? I actually can't calculate it. When Huang Chifa came back with a pot of hot water, Mr. Blind was meditating with his eyes closed. He secretly glanced at Mr. Blind and found that his hand was no longer cramping. However, there was a piece of paper in front of Mr. Blind. Huang Chifa recognized this piece of paper. It was because of this piece of paper that the Grandmaster returned from a foreign country. Second of the second month, the dragon raises its head. This was just a very common saying passed down from ancient times. What was the mystery behind it? Although Huang Chifa was puzzled, he did not hesitate and quickly walked up to Mr. Blind. Mr. Blind took out a small porcelain bottle from his clothes and handed it to Huang Chifa. Pour the powder inside into the hot water and drink it. Me? Huang Chifa was stunned. Of course. Mr. Blind nodded. Outside the bamboo forest, I saw that your glabella was dark. There was an aura of death rushing out from the canopy. It was already showing signs of death. Is it a disaster of blood? Huang Chifa was someone who knew how to read faces. When he heard the Grandmaster's words, he was so shocked that he broke out in a cold sweat. No. Mr. Blind shook his head and said, if it is only a disaster of blood, there is naturally a way to resolve it. Unfortunately, when the signs of death appear, it is a different situation. Grandmaster, save me. Huang Chifa's face was pale as he knelt before Mr. Blind in fear. He kowtowed so hard that even his voice was shaking. We can read faces, predict the heavens, the earth, and people, but we can't do it for ourselves. Do you know why? Mr. Blind asked calmly. Huang Chifa's voice was bitter as he said, it is already against the heavens that we seek fortune and avoid calamity. If we seek personal gain for ourselves and reverse yin and yang, then we will offend the heavens and be punished by the heavens. Grandmaster, after I called you last time, I have already donated all of my wealth. Grandmaster, I know my mistake now. Over the years, you have revealed too many secrets, even though it is nothing serious. Mr. Blind sighed, but you have changed the fate of so many people by reading their faces. Over time, you have committed many sins. It is too late to mend the pen after the sheep is lost. Now, not only have you lost your power, your body is slowly withering. Even the gods will not be able to save you. I am afraid you will not live to see the Mid-Autumn Festival this year. Grandmaster, save me, save me. Huang Chifa cried. Take this medicine every month. It should be enough for you to live through this year. Mr. Blind stood up and said calmly, take care of yourself. However, you will face a tribulation in the coming days. It is best not to go out. Stay here and recuperate. Cultivate your heart and mind well. Perhaps you will be able to survive. Mr. Blind's voice had gone far away, leaving Huang Chifa sitting on the ground a daze. The older a person was, the more afraid they were of death. Outside the bamboo forest was a large forest. Outside the forest was a famous scenic spot of the Wudong Mountain. In fact, the bamboo forest was actually within the scenic spot of the Wudong Mountain. However, there was a special formation set up in the bamboo forest. It was very easy for ordinary people to get lost in the bamboo forest. As they walked, they would walk out of the bamboo forest. Of course, if it was aerial photography, then it would be fine. However, who would take aerial photography of such a small bamboo forest for no reason? At this time, Songda and Song San found an electric pole. Then, the two of them squatted under this electric pole. Not because of anything else, but simply because the signal in this place was better. The matter was like this. Song San was bored and opened a domestic mobile video website. He just happened to see a video about wudong. He couldn't help but click on it. Today's #1 Qigong. The name of the video naturally made Song San very curious. After all, as a martial artist, he knew very well what Qigong was all about. Of course, like in TV dramas where one could step on the soles of one's feet and soar into the sky, there were special effects added to deceive children. However, real Qigong could still be done. F***, we were fooled. Song San scolded loudly. What #1 Qigong? Isn't this just ordinary parkour? Songda, who was sending an SMS to a certain woman on the other side of the ocean, rolled his eyes and said, "Do you think that martial arts experts are cabbages that you can meet casually? Besides, the country's machinery forbids martial arts. If it's real Qigong, how can it be released and spread on the internet?" Songda was saying this, but he saw Song San's expression at this time as if he had seen a ghost. He looked at the sky dumbly and said with his mouth wide open, "Duh, the cabbages expert you said has appeared." Songda raised his head in astonishment and saw a figure in the sky. At this time, the figure was descending toward a small forest not far away. They didn't see wrongly. It was indeed descending and not falling, because both Songda and Song San saw that this floating figure was carrying another figure on his back. Is this the legendary Qi controlling technique? My God, wudong is indeed one of the holy lands. Song San's eyes suddenly lit up. Songda didn't have time to continue sending SMS. He hurriedly stuffed his phone into his pocket and glanced at Song San. Then, he hurriedly walked towards the small forest where the figure had landed. When experts meet experts, of course they would fight. At this time, a scream suddenly came from the sky above the small forest. "Ah! Be careful, brother!" Wah! Obviously, there were two different voices. The figure fell on the canopy and broke the branches along the way. Finally, it was hooked and stopped. However, the branches couldn't bear the weight and finally broke. Bang! The two figures separated at the moment of falling. One quickly bounced and landed on the ground while the other hit the ground solidly. "Zhuifeng, you bastard, you didn't save me." The figure hit the ground and swore at this time. "It's not my fault. Instinctive reaction, hee. A young man walked over with a mischievous smile on his face. He pulled the figure up from the ground and patted the dirt off his body. They were Mo Xiaofei and Zhuifeng. As for why a human and a demon would appear here, it would have to start from before the start of the winter break. That day, after the Shinryu of Kelowna threw his first disciple, Mo Xiaofei, to Sun Xiaosheng, he left with the little butterfly monster, Luo Dance. Before leaving, the Shinryu of Kelowna once mentioned the matter of the cloth path, saying that it might let Mo Xiaofei know about his previous life. Therefore, Mo Xiaofei had an idea. He wanted to secretly go to Mount Tai during the winter vacation. Zhuifeng was another reason. However, as a student, it was too difficult to pay for the travel expenses along the way. Mo Xiaofei, who was determined to be a hero, was very determined not to use his superpower to make money, so he made a decision to travel on a budget. Plane? I can fly. Train? I can fly. Bus? I can still fly. Mo Xiaofei, who planned to fly all the way to Mount Tai, became Zhuifeng's exclusive mount. It had been a week since they set off, and they had successfully left the province where they lived and came here. "Water, give me some water." Mo Xiaofei sat down at this time and glanced at Zhuifeng weakly. It was fine for him to fly alone. However, with Zhuifeng on his back, it was hard for him. Not to mention, it took almost a day to travel. Even so, Mo Xiaofei felt that his flying time was increasing every day. Perhaps it was the so-called good training. Where are we? Mo Xiaofei glanced at Zhuifeng at this time. Zhuifeng quickly took out the map. He was responsible for looking at the terrain and route on this road. But at this moment, there was a soft sound suddenly. Two figures shot out from the woods. One was tall and majestic, and the other was thin. The tall and majestic man said loudly, "Song Ching Shu, the abandoned disciple of Shaolin. Please enlighten me, young masters." The thin man also said in a deep voice, "Song Ching Shu, the abandoned disciple of Shaolin. Please enlighten me, young masters." What the hell? Chapter 990. Mo Xiaofei and Juefeng looked at each other, not knowing the origin of these two uncles. "Well, uncles, did you make a mistake?" Mo Xiaofei stood up. "We're just passing by, not some young master." Songda, who called himself Song Ching Shu, said seriously, "Young masters, you don't have to hide. Just now, we've seen young master's magical lightness skill. It's really amazing." Mo Xiaofei gave a start. He tried his best to fly in a deserted place, and basically chose to fly at night. Today, because the road was mountainous, he planned to fly for a while during the day. Sure enough, he was seen. To tell you the truth, we're also martial artists. Songda, who called himself Song Ching Shu too, slowly exhaled at this time, pressing his palm on the trunk of an uncle beside him. When Song San's palm left, a clear palm print was left on the trunk, about 1 or 2 inches deep. "Wow, how'd he do it?" Juefeng walked to the trunk curiously, carefully looking at the palm print. With the power of his monster race, it was not difficult to blow up this tree. The difficulty was that he couldn't leave a palm print by pressing lightly. Song San's face was complacent at this time, chuckling. It's just some soft palm skills. Compared with this young master's lightness skill, it's really far behind. A martial arts master? Mo Xiaofei blinked. Since there were monsters like Juefeng and Shinryu in this world, and even he was a superpower user, and that boss, it was not strange that there were martial arts masters. Mo Xiaofei always felt that it was better not to expose his superpower. Since these two uncles thought it was the so-called lightness skill, it was not a big deal. "Young masters, what did you learn from?" Songda cupped his fist and asked. Mo Xiaofei coughed slightly. "I'm sorry. I promised my teacher not to reveal it casually." "Understood." Songda nodded, as if he was used to this. He immediately said, "I'm really sorry to disturb the two of you. It's just that the two of us have been training hard since we were young and have learned a lot of martial arts. Although the land of China was vast, it was difficult to find traces of people who truly practiced martial arts. Us two brothers have not made any progress for a long time. I wonder if the two young masters can give us some guidance." In fact, Songda's words were already very polite. It was precisely because he had seen the two of them fly for such a long time that Songda had the patience to call them little master. Otherwise, in reality, the two of them were just children. On the other side, Mo Xiaofei even felt apologetic if he delayed. After all, the big man's eyes were shining. "But I don't know any martial arts. Let me try." Unexpectedly, Juefeng said excitedly. Then, he closed his eyes and stood in front of the tree trunk. He imitated Song San and pressed his palm on the tree trunk. However, nothing happened after Juefeng pressed it for a while. Songda and Song San looked at each other. Song San shook his head and smiled. "Little master, although this soft palm is not a top-notch martial art, it's the result of years of hard work." Suddenly, a surge of wild aura erupted from Juefeng's body. In an instant, it was as if there were countless murderous auras soaring into the sky, covering the sky like dark clouds. Under the impact of this terrifying murderous aura, Songda and Song San's mouths were dry and their brains were buzzing. With a loud bang, Songda and Song San widened their eyes at the same time. Their eyeballs almost fell out. This was because the entire tree directly exploded under wind-chasing Wolf's palm. The tree trunk that was hard for a person to wrap their arms around directly turned into sawdust. "Rumble, it's really difficult." Juefeng shook his head and looked at his palm. Then, he pressed on another tree, seemingly intending to try again. Mo Xiaofei walked to Juefeng in shock and knocked on his head. "Are you stupid? This is a scenic spot. What if you have to pay for the damages?" "Big brother, I've already restrained my strength." Juefeng shrugged his shoulders. He was a fearless person. However, he was afraid of Mo Xiaofei's punishment for some reason. Thus, he had to lower his head honestly. Mo Xiaofei sighed. I still have some pocket money left. I'll go find the person in charge here and see if it's enough for compensation. Also, you released too much demonic aura. What if it's discovered? Sorry, I've tried my best to restrain it. In fact, I didn't release much. Zhuai Feng lowered his head. Mo Xiaofei sighed again. After rubbing Zhuai Feng's head, he turned around. By the way, the two uncles. Hey, where are they? Mo Xiaofei blinked his eyes. The two strange uncles who suddenly appeared disappeared without him noticing. Zhuai Feng sniffed and then pointed in a direction. They seem to have gone there. Should we go after them? Forget it. Let's see how to deal with this tree first. Mo Xiaofei shook his head. They were probably scared away by the demonic aura released by Zhuai Feng. For Mo Xiaofei, this was just a small episode. Under the telephone pole outside the woods, Songda and Song San were leaning against each other. The two brothers were drenched and gasping for breath. This murderous aura, is it really released by a human? Song San took a few deep breaths. For a moment, I thought I was going to be killed. He intended to smoke a cigarette, but the hand holding the cigarette box kept trembling. The cigarette fell from the box, and he couldn't catch it. At this moment, Songda was also silently reciting the incantation Blind had written for him earlier. He gradually calmed down and couldn't help but let out a long sigh. When I was still in Shaolin Temple, Master said that there were many capable people in the Divine Continent, and that there was always someone better than you. The blind man also said that at his level, there were still many people who were more powerful than him. Songda bitterly laughed again. All these years, us three brothers have been living in a foreign country. Not only have our martial arts stagnated, I'm afraid that even our eyesight has also stagnated. Just now, if that young master's palm had landed on my body, I'm afraid that even with my martial arts, I wouldn't have been able to withstand it. Yeah, who would have thought that the true power of these two young warriors could be so profound? Song San also sighed, and then said, Maybe this is not as simple as a martial artist's true power. You're saying, these two young masters are the same as the blind man? Songda was startled. Song San said, To be honest, you and I are both warriors. We've been training hard for decades. Do you think that with the true power of a warrior, they can really fly? That's just a fantasy we've always had. Songda was silent, but he more or less agreed with Song San's words. After all, this was Wudong. Maybe to ordinary people, it was just a famous scenic spot, but Wudong Mountain was full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. This was something he had heard from his master when he was still in Shaolin Temple. Even though they said so, the two brothers Songda and Song San couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed when they met two young people who had great skills that far surpassed them. They naturally didn't have the mood to continue sightseeing and directly rushed towards the house in the bamboo forest. Unexpectedly, they met the blind man on the way. When the blind man saw the two of them, he didn't say much and directly said, I've finished dealing with the matters in Wudong. Next, we'll leave this place. So fast. Songda was startled. The blind man said, I've already seen the message my sect's senior brother left for me. There's a special way to interpret it. He also told me the destination of this trip. There's no time to lose. Let's leave now. All right. Songda nodded, but he suddenly remembered the two young experts he met in the forest. He pondered for a moment and said, That's right, blind man. I have something to ask you. Speak. Is there anyone like you on Wudong Mountain? Songda stared at the blind man and asked. The blind man was silent for a moment, then slowly said, There used to be. Then now, the blind man didn't say anything. He only said indifferently, It's getting late. Do you want to leave? If you don't want to leave, I can do it myself. Songda and Song San looked at each other and nodded. They didn't mention that they met the young experts in the forest because that would be too embarrassing. Mo Xiaofei and Zhuai Feng walked around nearby, but didn't find any place like the management office. Mo Xiaofei had no choice but to return to the original place and deal with the corpse of the fallen ancient tree. After that, he and Zhuai Feng continued their journey. It seemed that it was indeed dangerous to travel during the day to meet living people in the deep forest. Mo Xiaofei had no choice but to continue his plan of traveling at night. In Juefeng, we're obviously going to Mount Tai. Why do we fly to Wudong Mountain? There's something wrong with your navigation. From the place where they lived, Wudong Mountain wasn't in a straight line with Mount Tai. It's all mountain roads. They look similar. There's no road sign. It's good enough that we didn't go to the sea, right? Juefeng stuck out his tongue, then suddenly said, "Brother, there's a light in front. It seems that someone lives there." It was the light from the depths of the bamboo forest. It seemed to be a wooden house. "Why don't we stay here tonight?" Juefeng suggested. Mo Xiaofei thought for a while. Including last night, they had been on the road for 1 night and 1 day. The flight time was about 15 hours, which was indeed his limit. At this moment, he felt a headache and knew that he couldn't force himself to continue, so he nodded. They then quietly landed in front of the wooden house. It was a very exquisite house, not like it was built casually. "Is there anyone here?" Mo Xiaofei and Juefeng waited outside the door for a while before footsteps were heard. Then a white-haired, haggard old man opened the door. "Hello, old man," Mo Xiaofei said very politely. "My brother and I got lost nearby. We don't know if we found this place. My phone just ran out of battery. Can you let us stay here for 1 night?" The old man looked at Mo Xiaofei and Juefeng for a while. No one knew what he was thinking, but his eyes were gloomy and scary, which made Mo Xiaofei and Juefeng feel a little uncomfortable. Unexpectedly, the old man suddenly showed a smile and said kindly, "Come in. It's cold outside. Come in and have a rest. I'm cooking. If you don't mind, have some." "Thank you, old man." Mo Xiaofei quickly thanked him politely. After the old man led the two of them into the wooden house, he walked towards the kitchen and left the two of them in a small hall inside the house. The structure of this wooden house was older than any old house Mo Xiaofei had ever seen, but it was very clean. It seemed that someone had been living here for a long time. Wind-chasing Wolf rested his head on his hands and said, "Big brother, this old man looks weird. Be careful later. I don't know why this old man lives here alone in this deep forest." Mo Xiaofei nodded. The old man's eyes were really weird at first. It seemed that he had no interest in life, but he suddenly brightened up. Juefeng yawned, lying on the table, and said, "Brother, I'm a little sleepy. Wake me up when we eat." Mo Xiaofei shook his head. Looking at Juefeng's sleeping appearance, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was just that the depths of the bamboo forest were unusually quiet. It was even quieter when the sun went down. There was only the flickering candlelight in front of him. Mo Xiaofei also felt a little tired as he unknowingly closed his eyes. For a superpower user like him, the best way to replenish his spirit was to rest and sleep. At this moment, a night breeze blew in from the window and extinguished the candlelight in the small hall. Soon after, the wooden door outside the hall slowly opened. The old man who went to the kitchen came in with some food. He didn't intend to light the candles. He just moved around with the help of some light outside the hall. After that, the old man slowly looked at Mo Xiaofei and Juefeng, who had fallen asleep. He picked up the bowl and slowly ate. As he ate, he said, "I used to eat all kinds of delicacies every day. I lived a life of luxury. I don't think it's bad, and I'm not tired of it. So I occasionally eat a simple meal. The doctor said I should eat something bland. But I think one's life is short. Why should I limit myself?" Mo Xiaofei and Juefeng still hadn't woken up. The old man continued to talk to himself. "Haha. Now, I think it's a blessing to be able to eat this simple meal. But it's a pity that I don't have long to live. Tell me, what should I do if I don't have long to live?" The old man stared at Mo Xiaofei and Juefeng. His face suddenly turned gloomy. "You're still so young. You have a lot of days ahead. Why don't you lend me some time?" Feng Shui metaphysics reversed yin and yang and changed one's fate. Naturally, there were ways to extend one's life.